Okay, it looks like we can begin our Iowa City City Council budget work session for Tuesday, January the 9th, 2018. And it looks to me like the first topic is a review of Saturday's work session. What do you have in mind, Jeff?
Well, it's just an opportunity, if you wish, to discuss anything that came from Saturday, any questions for us, any particular items that you heard about that you want to discuss as a group. You can do so now. If you prefer to hold off on that, or if you have no questions, we can jump right into the CIP. It's your preference.
Any thoughts, folks?
I mean, we are going to do a subsequent budget review session, aren't we, Jim?
It seems to me we should. If there are, it seems to me there are two choices. One is if we only have a few items to bring up, we could do it during a regular work session. If there's more extensive discussion, we need to dedicate a special work session for that. That's the way it seems to me.
What do we have on the work session next week?
Review of the pedestrian mall plans and specs. We probably have some time to get into questions, but as the mayor said, if everybody has a long list, we're going to need some special sessions. If it's just a couple items, we might be able to finish it on the 16th.
So who has specific items they want to bring up right now?
I do, or can bring it up later.
All right, who else? I haven't had a chance to think about it enough, to be frankly, from my point of view. So,
I guess I have one little thing, but I don't think it'll take very long.
One little thing.
Preference would be a separate work session.
John, are there topics you want to bring up today?
Well, it sort of depends on what format we're talking about.
I don't mean to discuss thoroughly. I mean just to identify whether there are topics you want to discuss in terms of the budget.
The CIP or the
budget?
The operating budget.
The operating budget?
Yeah.
I didn't have that many issues with the operating budget. So,
Susan, did you?
No, and I guess my suggestion is let's start with the 16th and then see if we need to do a special work session after that. I mean,
I think that makes sense, Susan. I'd agree
I don't have
with
a
that.
lot.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to bring up?
I didn't either. It doesn't
Kingsley,
sound
you
like
have something, Miles?
Propose something about affordable housing. I don't know if that's, yeah.
You wanted to bring up something about affordable housing, is that
Yes.
what you said? Okay. Kingsley, did you have something?
Yeah, I did have a couple of things.
A couple of things? Why don't you just state them so we know what they are?
Okay.
Don't go into detail, just, whatever the topics are.
Well, mine was around advancing social justice and racial equity. They're somewhat tied to the strategic plan as well, around economic development. So those two main things.
All right. It sounds to me like we can preliminarily discuss this on the 16th. And if we conclude we need more time, we'll schedule it.
And mine is very brief too, Jim.
Sure.
I just want to email Jeff about this. I want a few more details regarding the retail consultant. So if we could just have a memo on that, that's something I'd like. Other than that, nothing else.
All right. Sounds to me like we could dive into the CIP then.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your time, especially coming off the long day Saturday. We have a little bit of a different approach to today than we have taken in years past, for those of you that have been through this program. After last year's program, we internally talked about reformatting this in a way that would be usable for the public throughout the year, as opposed to just a static one-time presentation. So we've created the majority of the presentation is going to be through a GIS-based map, and we're going to kind of take you from point to point on a map and talk to you about each of the projects. There is some introductory slides for the kind of the overview and a couple of the in-progress items. But when we actually get into the CIP program, it's going to be an interactive map. And it's probably not the most conducive for a meeting like this. It's going to be a little bit jumpy at times, but I think it's going to be a very nice tool for the public when we're able to put the CIP to rest and finalize that and get what you'll see is a map online for residents to really start to drill into specific areas of town and understand what improvements may be on the horizon in their neighborhood. So Finance and Public Works have worked hard to create that, and they're going to lead you through the presentation today. We're going to start with Public Works Director Ron Kanucky, who's going to give a quick intro, and then I think he's going to turn it over to Dennis for some comments.
Thank you. Today we'll be covering what's in your budget book, starting on page 497. That's where the capital projects funding begins. We have 126 projects that are identified in the capital program. We also have approximately 30 projects that will show up on one slide here in a minute, but our ongoing projects, ones that don't actually show up in your budget book because they were funded in a previous fiscal year, but are projects that we are currently working on. So, with that, we're working on over 150 projects right now in our 5-year program. We'll be flipping between a PowerPoint and we'll have the ArcGIS later on as we work our way into it. It's been a project that both Finance and Public Works have been working on diligently over the last couple weeks, trying to get things pulled together. Hopefully technology doesn't bite us, so we'll see how that goes. But we'll start things off with Dennis, and he'll talk about the overview of the budget.
I'll just give you a quick overview of the CIP process and how the CIP program was put together. And this was a process that started late last summer. Around September 1st, the forms, which are Excel documents, were sent to the departments to begin gathering information about updates to projects and new projects. And on September 22nd, those forms were due back to the Finance Department, and we began to summarize all of those projects, last year's projects, and pull all that information together. And then through the month of October, we really began to compile that information. A CIP committee met to review those projects, to discuss them, to make sure they're coordinated and prioritized. And we had 2 separate meetings through the month of October, from which we pulled essentially the program together. And then through the month of November and early December, we began to integrate the first year or 2 of that CIP program into the operating budget. So, as we pulled that together, we looked at debt financing and operating revenues and what could be funded, what couldn't. And then on December 22nd, the budget book was distributed, and as Ron mentioned, on page 497 is where the capital projects fund and the capital program begins. And I also mentioned on page 517 there is a capital project table of contents in there. So if you want to refer to more detail about any particular project, that is a quick reference towards the more detailed sheet on that particular project. Just a quick summary as far as the contents of the program. This is a pie chart of the 5-year expenditure totals by division. And you can see that the streets division is once again the largest piece of that pie, and which is pretty typical at $62 million. Next largest is the park maintenance or parks projects, and then a rather large slice of there is the transit operations, and that's a little deceptive because of that 18.1 million, 18 million of that is a future transportation facility out in year 5 of the program. Also, wastewater is a fairly large portion of the CIP budget, and then probably larger than normal this year is the city manager's slice at $6.8 million, which represents the access center has been incorporated into the program. So how are those projects being funded? The total funding sources come to $150 million. Now that's a little less than the expenditures, but part of that is because there are prior year revenues and funding sources that are being used to fund some of these projects. You can see that from the pie chart, the largest portion of the funding sources is our general obligation bonded debt. So it just reinforces the importance of that AAA bond rating. And the GO bonds are primarily used to fund road and street improvements and park improvements. The next largest slice of that is federal grants. That's also a little deceptive because $12 million of that $23 million represents an anticipated grant for that transportation facility, which may or may not occur. And then the next larger slices are wastewater fund and the road use tax fund. So this just gives you an idea of all the different funding sources and operating budgets and rates and fees and debt and grants that all come together to form the capital budget. And this chart here shows you the anticipated expenditures over the next 5 years. And it's pretty typical that this chart would slant downward as you would mostly know what you're going to do in the next year or two, and then it tapers off. In this case, we have a little anomaly on 2022, which is once again that transportation facility of $18 million, which kind of skews that year 22 on this chart. 2018, of course, is also rather high, which also represents the hopefully the final year of expenditure for the Gateway project, and also the completion of the Public Works Facility project. And so that kind of, I guess, wraps up just from a graphic nutshell the summary of the CIP budget, and then I'll hand it back to Ron and Jason here to tell you about the ongoing projects.
So this slide just demonstrates, or it shows what we have for ongoing projects within the city. They can be anywhere from in the final design stage to in the preliminary design pieces. There again, the list is, I'm not going to go through each one of the projects, but if there's any projects that you would have any question on that list, we can definitely get more information for you on those.
I don't think we've shown you this before.
Would you linger there for a minute or so?
Yeah, this is a point that I really wanted to make with you all as you get into what's planned in the next 5 years. This list of projects here is longer than usual, and I think you're aware there's probably some projects up there that this council has talked about on numerous occasions, and you might be wondering at what stage as it's in, but. As Ron said, these are projects in some sort of design phase where it's been awarded or somewhere along the process. You know, I wouldn't have a number, but maybe a typical year might be half this amount. We just have a backlog of projects right now, and it's mostly in the public works and the parks area. And we had to use this as a filter as we were determining the plan for the next 5 years. There's certainly projects that are out 2, 3, 4 years that we would like to see accelerated, but we simply don't have the capacity to do this. So you're looking at, you know, all these projects hopefully getting constructed or completed in 18 for the most part. And then when you look at the CIP and we actually start going through the 2018 projects, those are in addition to this list here. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you have your discussions today, that we're in a little bit of an unusual place where we're behind the 8 ball a little bit on getting some of these projects completed.
So this graphic is not in this report?
These would be projects that you would not see in your CIP because they've been funded in previous years.
I don't know how many slides you're going to present, but I would imagine we'd like to have a copy of the images.
Sure.
These things, which are projects like where's that?
Go ahead, yeah. Go ahead.
All right, so we'll kick things off here looking at annual projects. So these are those projects that there's really money in the budget every year. A lot of these don't have specific locations that are determined necessarily years in advance. It's really kind of available money to address those projects or those areas that are the most urgent needs. So just kind of stepping through these.
Jason, can I cut in real quick? I'm sorry. I just want to orient the council to the new map here. So what you have across the top are tabs, mostly sorted by departments. Obviously, we're going to start on the annual projects now, but from a user standpoint, again, what we hope is that this would be a web-based module that you'd be able to go into and the public would be able to go into. And as you click on any one of those thumbnail tabs on the left-hand side, what you'll see is that you'll zoom in to the location in Iowa City where that project is going to take place, and then there'll be some additional information presented to you at that time. So that's how this is going to function. This first part's a little unique, and as Jason mentioned, these are annual projects that really don't have a location. It's like maybe a street resurfacing as an example, where we're doing it all over the city.
Okay.
So yeah, so with that, just the one thing to keep in mind, the indicator here, it shows up as a dot on the map. For these, it's not a great representation just because, again, they vary by year, so don't pay too much attention to the dot for this set of slides, but it just gives you an idea of these annual projects.
So we're starting with the Parks Annual Improvement Fund. In years past, this has been used for a number of different projects, but now it is being set forth with our Park Master Plan that we recently completed. So everything I talked to you about today pretty much follows the Park Master Plan, and this fund gives us the opportunity to go back in parks that aren't getting major renovations to fix things up and keep them operating until they come up for a full renovation. So priorities with this fund are park signage throughout all the parks. Will be changing over to the new park signs eventually at all of our parks. Site furnishing, so accessible picnic tables, recycling bins, garbage bins, things that will be upgraded to match what our master plan called for. Shelter facility maintenance throughout the park system, so parks that aren't getting a full renovation on their park shelters might need a new roof or some other work done on it to keep it in service a little bit longer. Court maintenance, we have a number of basketball courts that need resurfacing, tennis courts, that sort of thing. And then also opportunities for partner opportunities or emerging opportunities. 2 years ago, we would never have dreamed we were going to make pickleball courts and some of the other new sports that we've seen in the last year. So this fund gives us some flexibility to adjust as we have new community needs come up. After that, we have our ADA accessibility improvements. This was another thing that was looked at through our park master plan and prioritized so that we hit a number of parks in each area of the city. So we have it planned out each year. You'll see a number of those come up in our overall plan. But these are smaller improvements. So this happens to be Tower Court Park, which is a newer park. But you can see the railroad ties around the play equipment. That's one of the accessibility issues. So some of this money will go to take those out, add paved paths to get us from the sidewalk to the playground. So you can see here it's a very short distance, but we have a number of those kind of small fixes that need to be done in the majority of our parks. So we're going to bite off 3 or 4 parks per year to increase the accessibility throughout.
Hey, Julie, it's time for questions. Okay.
Go ahead.
I think you weren't here at the last meeting, but I don't know whether or not Jeff had talked about the fact that there was a question, and Mazai here had brought it up, around the I went through each park that introduced any type of playground element and discussion around whether or not we could look at the cost of a rubberized surface or a different surface. The only question I have here is, how will that cost estimate change, and will we have those numbers before we need to certify the budget? Because, I worked on this somewhat similarly in the school district, and it would substantially change the cost estimate that we have before us today. And and we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, almost 13 parks over the course of about 5 years.
Yeah, it would double or triple the estimate that we have in there if we were going to do a different surface. And my understanding of providing inclusive, accessible playgrounds is we wouldn't need to do it at every single playground as long as we distribute them throughout the system. So we would want to consider it that way so that we have maybe a more accessible playground in each district. Later on, you'll see Willow Creek Playground coming up next year or the year after. We would hope that that would be one that we could do in a more inclusive draw or regional draw for that particular playground as well.
Yeah, and I think I gave you the example of the downtown surfacing roughly 110,000 for just the rubberized surfacing component of that. So that's not much bigger than most neighborhood park playgrounds. That's probably a cost that you could apply, as just a ballpark to any of these projects if you wanted to go that route.
I guess I really like the idea of at least included some of them. If you can done this in some of the park, will be good because we make inclusive for some people who really with this special need and need that. Thanks.
So I have one trivial point. The text is very hard to read, at least to my eye, on the bottom left in the white. I don't know what that's all about, but I don't know if users online would have difficulty reading it or not.
Okay, we'll key in on that.
All right, moving on to the annual traffic signal projects. This is, again, a pot of money that's used annually to look at whether it's installation of new traffic signals, or it could be updating or improving existing signals. So it may be going to the accessible push buttons, or again, it could be brand new signals, either independent or part of other projects. Traffic calming, this is the fund that is used when we get requests for the traffic calming program. So again, they would have to go through that program, would have to become a project through that program, and if it is, it would be paid for out of this account. So again, this one would be dependent on what we get for requests, how those play out through the system, but again, this is how those would be funded, whether it's speed humps, bump outs, or other improvements. Curb ramps, ADA improvements. So this is the annual program that goes through and we select sites throughout the city that would look to update or install ADA improvements. This recently has been installing curb ramps where there aren't curb ramps. So in locations where we have full curb that ties into sidewalk, we would go through and install new curb ramps that would meet ADA guidelines. There's also locations where we have ramps that don't meet current standards, so it may be they're just simply plain concrete. There's some that have the red color but don't have the truncated domes. So again, this would be an annual project where we would select sites to go through and make those improvements. As far as the selection process goes, it can be, there's a number of factors that play into it. Again, the preference is to kind of do the worst first, so it'd be those ones that have no ramp at all, really focus on those. Also playing into that decision is requests that we get from the public. So if we get complaints or frequent locations that people bring to our attention, then that will play into the selection process as well.
Jason, my recollection is that we have a GIS-based map identifying the location of all the curb ramps and where curb ramps are needed.
Yep. And so that then also plays into that. It has those locations for ones that don't meet current standards, ones that do, and then also has information regarding is there any ramp or no ramp, and all that information. The annual pavement rehabilitation program, so this is typically the asphalt overlay. It includes the asphalt overlay, but also includes PCC patch, so concrete patching, chip seal improvements, crack sealing, those programs as well. The asphalt overlay just tends to be the largest portion of that usually. Looking at this year, what we'd be looking at, it's going to be a bit of a unique year because we're going to have 2 joint projects with the DOT. And those will include parts of Riverside Drive, Highway 1, Highway 6, so basically going from Rocky Shore down to Sturgis Corner. And then there'll also be another stretch that will be Burlington Street from essentially Van Buren up to Summit, and then Governor from Burlington up to where it ties back into Dodge. And those will actually be shown later, so I'll have a map of those locations. But just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then the city portion of it will, so I guess taking a step back, so those DOT partner projects, in those situations, the DOT will fund essentially the travel lanes, so the overlay for those, and the city is responsible for improvements such as intake top replacement or improvements to the storm sewer, sanitary sewer, basically our utilities. And then this year's portion for the city, we'll be looking at doing Court Street from Dodge to Johnson. and then also Johnson Street from Burlington to Court. And so overall, that's in the neighborhood of about 7.7 million. Just to kind of give you an idea of the magnitude of that, our overlay program, or the total pavement rehabilitation program, is usually in the neighborhood of 2 million. So it's obviously going to be a very large year for overlays in Iowa City.
Jason, could you say again what the segments are for Court Street and Johnson Street?
Yep, so Court Street will be from Dodge to Johnson, and then Johnson Street will be from Burlington to Court. And that would be just the city, the sole city portion of it.
Thanks.
Jason, is the 7.7 million just the city's portion?
No.
Okay.
So a lot of that will be funded with the DOT, but that's just kind of the total project cost would be the 7.7.
And I think something to point out with this fund, you know, with mainly this is road use tax funds, but we also have some of our utility franchise fees that are used for this fund. 2015, this fund was about $640,000. 2018, we're at 1.6 million, and out at 2022, we're at 2.3 million. So there is a lot of growth that's happening in this fund. One of the things that we did, we kind of rolled a lot of the other annual that we used to have. So we would have some alley programs, we would have brick streets, we'd have railroad crossings. All those other annuals have all been rolled back into this because it made sense that it's all street related, so it would all fall into one fund. But those were, you know, those other pieces that we rolled in were small, you know, so we're really using a large piece of the road use tax fund to help with our rehabilitation of our city streets.
The underground electrical facilities, so what this looks to do is essentially underground Mid-Americans facilities typically. So in locations where we would require them to relocate due to some sort of project, whether it's a city project, development project, those provide opportunities to have them go underground instead of relocating to another location aerial. And so this is a fund that is there for those situations. Some of the corridors that we've been focusing on in the past have been Dubuque Street, Riverside, and Gilbert. Some of the larger projects, obviously with the Gateway project, there was a large portion of that was of this fund that was used for that. We've also been able to take advantage of some opportunities that have come up from other projects. One example is the Augusta Place development that's happening right now. We were able to underground some of the electrical, or we will be able to underground some of the electrical facilities along Van Buren, again, just with that opportunity that had come up unexpectedly. So, annual bridge maintenance and repair fund is pretty much what it says. So this is a fund to look at repairing and regular maintenance for our bridges. It also funds the biannual inspections that are required for our bridges. So it's kind of whatever comes out of those inspections. This would also have funding available for some fairly minor maintenance and repair. Obviously, if we start talking a lot of reconstructions, there would be need for additional money, but this would fund a fair amount of those repairs. The annual sewer main replacement fund is one that looks at, again, repairs to the sanitary sewer system. This includes not only spot repairs where you're digging up the sewer and actually making physical repairs, but also our lining program. So it kind of the preventative maintenance for our sanitary sewer system would come out of this as well. We typically do a project every year that looks to line sewers. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. As I was going through all the numbers, do you base that on past sewer breakage or history of when you know the date that sewer, some of them are quite ancient, how do you base it on which ones you're going to repair?
So we have sort of an ongoing, I guess, review of the system. And yeah, a lot of times it's based on where we've had issues. A lot of times with sanitary sewer, you find out fairly quickly where those areas are. So some of them are, you know, more emergency repairs. As far as the preventative maintenance goes, we regularly inspect our sewer system. So we go through camera various locations throughout the year and kind of rotate that annually. And so we'll identify some of those locations. So if it's an area where, for the most part, it's in pretty decent shape, but it's starting to show signs of use, then we can go through and line it and buy some additional time before we have to completely reconstruct.
Jason, I can't remember, is our sewer combined?
It is not. Every once in a while, we come across a location where there may be one or two left, but for the most part, we believe the system is completely separated. The parking facility restoration, so this again is an annual project that looks at our parking structures and just going through again.
Like word out the way you want it to without the interpretation of the reporter. All right, cool. Can I have you scoot a little bit closer to the wall? And actually, if you just want to have a seat right here. Yeah, and I'll probably only ask you 2 or 3 questions. Katie wants to do a press release for next Monday. Oh, jeez. She's out right now. I think she'll be back tomorrow, hopefully. So she'll probably be reaching out about that. That's fine. What's that?
Wireless mic's bleeding over.
Are you hearing our conversation?
Yeah. Yes. Well, did you perform the magic there, Ashley?
Electrical work? No, just kidding.
We have a late entry to the CIP. We need to upgrade our audio equipment.
All right, so getting back to it, the parking facility, again, this is really just kind of for regular maintenance of our parking structures. Varies year by year, again, kind of based on need. The annual stormwater improvements, so this is an annual program that looks at improvements that are needed for the stormwater system. So whether it's storm sewer, intakes, drainage ditches, basically any of those issues that come up over time regarding stormwater, runoff, that kind of stuff. And again, this varies year by year depending on need. And City Hall, other projects, again, this is kind of an annual improvements, sort of the regular maintenance needed for City Hall. Again, kind of based on need and varies year to year. You can see here some of the items that fall under this category would be the HVAC, boiler, fire suppression, security, and other building components. So again, kind of the regular maintenance for the facility. So with that, we're actually going to switch gears again back to talk about the bicycle master plan.
I like this one.
Good afternoon. Kent Ralston, Transportation Planner. Thanks for having me. I just wanted to spend about 5 minutes or so to discuss the Bike Master Plan's recommendations for prioritizing improvements. As many of you know, the plan was adopted last fall after about a 9-month process working with Alta Planning and Design. Part of the plan prioritizes projects based on feedback, both from the public, of course, as well as the 11-member Bicycle Advisory Committee that was put together to help sort of guide us through the Bike Master Plan process. The plan breaks down the implementation of projects into 4 sections, as you can see on the screen. The first are immediate term projects, which represent about 12.4 miles of either additional bike infrastructure or improvements to bike infrastructure already in place for about $800,000 worth of projects. The near term projects are about 24.5 miles of, again, either additional on-street bike facilities or improvements and about $2.4 million worth of projects. And then we get into long-term projects, which are out past 2020, and that adds an additional 44 miles of bike facilities, either new or improved, at a cost of about $11 million. Then we get into a host of unscheduled projects that are projects that we would like to include in the plan, but just didn't really raise to the top of the priority list at that time. If you look at the actual map itself of priorities, it's a little hard to see. The darker the color, the more immediate need. So sort of that brown color are the high priority recommendations, and then you get down into sort of the yellowish color, and those are the more low priority recommendations. If you look at the map, you can sort of envision a couple of themes that occur. One is there's sort of a loop system that's sort of envisioned around Iowa City, and you can kind of see that starting on the west side of town out towards Mormon Trek, trailing off to the south around the McAllister Boulevard, existing portion of McAllister Boulevard, and in addition to the new portion that'll be constructed in several years, and then around to Scott Boulevard and so forth. So you can kind of see, you can kind of envision that loop system that's occurring. I think the other theme that you see occurring is sort of in the central portion of the city, really good east, west, and north-south connectivity. That was really a focus of the plan. The city manager's office was kind enough to put together this nice pamphlet that shows the projects that are proposed in the CIP. There's a couple dozen projects here. The easiest way to read this is that those orange flags represent projects that are identified as immediate term projects in the Bike Master Plan, and sort of that bluish color flags represent the near term projects in the plan. And you can see that we've got some from each one of those categories proposed in the 5-year CIP. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a project category key, and in looking at those quickly, there are 5 different sort of elements. The first being a bike lane, which is what you all, I think, consider a standard bike lane, which is a 5-foot separated portion of the roadway exclusively for use by bicyclists. A good example of that is down on South Sycamore. The second is a buffered bike lane, and these are the same as a traditional bike lane, except you have a 2 or 3 foot wide buffer that further separates the bicyclists from motor vehicles. Provides a little bit more protection. 4 to 3 lane conversions, which I think most all of you know about, and most recently, and the best example is on First Avenue by Southeast Junior High from Bradford South to Highway 6. That's where you take a 4-lane roadway and narrow it to 3 lanes, and then you're able to add bike lanes as well. So you have a center left turn lane, a through lane in either direction, and then bike lanes. The next category is bicycle boulevards. These can take sort of a wide array of improvements, but typically you want to think about wayfinding signage, perhaps pavement markings, and then having staff look into essentially making those corridors easiest for bicycle use. And again, those can take many shapes. And then the last is the side path or a separated trail. And these are completely separated facilities, either sort of taking the shape of a wide sidewalk along an arterial street or a completely separated trail that you might see through a park or otherwise. I didn't want to go through all these projects. I did just want to highlight a few of the ones that I think are sort of most exciting. And I think those are the 4 to 3 lane projects. And you can see there in the orange flags, there are 1, 2, 3 4 to 3 lane projects in the next several years that we hope to complete. One is on Clinton Street between Church and Benton. One is on Mormon Trek between Melrose and West Side Drive. And then the last is on Madison Street from Market to Court in 2019. I think those are really exciting projects and will probably reshape sort of the bicycling community more than most projects that we've seen in the past few years. The other sort of exciting projects, I think, are the Dodge and Governor Street buffered bike lanes that we anticipate completing next year with the overlay of Governor Street. So again, I didn't want to take all your time and go through all these, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about those or any other projects.
And if I could just add a couple of things, next year, in many respects, is the year of the bike lane here. If we're able to accomplish all these, we have a number of bike lanes going in. Kent mentioned the Dodge and Governor couplet with our first buffered bike lanes. That's an exceptionally large stretch of those 2 roadways that'll get bike lanes. But you also see the Clinton Street project reflected in here that you have awarded that contract. That is moving forward. And you also will see Camp Cardinal and Mormon Trek listed here. So some very large stretches of bike lanes going in next year. Kent did a good job highlighting some of the other projects. The one that Council has talked about quite a bit in the past year that he didn't mention is Gilbert Street. And the funding for Gilbert Street is listed in 2020. So we're looking at that 3 years out. I guess that'd be 2 years out now. And I just want to give you some context into how staff went about prioritizing these. We always look for what's logical to partner this with. So for example, we have a Prentice Street Bridge replacement coming up. It doesn't make any sense for us to go and reconfigure the alignment of Prentice Street only to rip out the bridge next year and have to do it the year after. So we try to align these with other projects. We look at things that are happening in that immediate area, other projects in that area, and we'll try to couple projects together. So that's why you may not see perfect alignment with the master plan if you compare this with the plan document, but I think this is pretty darn aggressive, and I think that it would be a huge step forward to be able to carry it out as it's been laid out in the CIP.
Super quick, I know we didn't make the gold. What specific infrastructure projects did they identify as helpful on that piece? I know there's a lot of criteria that go into getting to gold, but did they identify anything else to get us up over that hump in terms of infrastructure?
Right, so what Rockney's referencing, I think there's a League of American Bicyclists silver level that we've achieved here in town, and we were shooting for the gold, as was the council's one of the goals of the council. We got word that we were re-awarded silver, but we didn't quite get to the gold level. The report card that we used to get, Rockney used to give us very detailed answers as to what we needed to do to achieve the gold. That wasn't the case this go around, and I think there's so many more communities that are achieving these levels of status that they didn't. Their report cards changed a little bit. So right now we don't know, but we intend to call them and have a discussion with them to see exactly what it was. One of the bigger things, it wasn't infrastructure related, was the fact that we had not yet had our bicycle advisory committee and sort of a bike coordinator position hired yet and in place. I know that was one of the issues, but as far as infrastructure goes, we'll need to check with them and ask.
Okay.
Looks good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's as the city manager suggested, I think it's very aggressive and will really transform at least the center part of town. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks again.
So with that, we'll move on to Parks and Rec. I think we'll kick things off here with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan.
Great. And actually, as I go through all these projects, as I mentioned, they all relate back to the master plan. So I'll cover those as we go through, and then at the end we have kind of a summary sheet to show you. And I can just start by saying what an amazing time to be a Parks and Rec director here with all these projects, and what an amazing community to get to do all these things in the parks. We'll start with Riverfront Crossings Park. This picture is from back in probably August, and if you've been out there lately, you know we are making quite a bit of progress with Phase 1. The trails are in, some of the parking is in. Phase 2 is a nature play, and that's already been awarded. That will be built first thing in the spring. This project contemplates Phase 3, which we are just about ready to go out to bid for, and that will include 2 restroom shelters, electrical and lighting throughout the park, and some of the park signage. So that will be Phase 3, which is what this portion is. Future phases beyond that will include the art pieces in the middle of the drive circle. There's some work along the river, some additional trails. There'll be probably phases 4 or 5, and who knows after that. But we're making great progress and hope to have a lot of this done by midsummer next summer.
Good deal. Julie, could you zoom back out to the previous slide that shows the whole city? Yeah, so I just want to draw attention to the fact that it appears to be that there are projects planned for parks all over the city, not just in a particular part of it.
And that was part of what the master plan did, was it went through and looked at every single park, looked at the current infrastructure in each of those parks, rated each one for accessibility issues. And as we put together this 5-year CIP, you'll notice that the projects are spread out throughout the community. Some are smaller, some are larger, but we try to hit a little bit in each district to make sure that each district is served by equitable facilities throughout the parks. So.
Great, thanks.
Creekside Park, last summer we did the master plan for this with the neighborhood. Creekside has a few additional properties that were acquired through flood mitigation, so the park will be redone with a new playground that will be moved out of the floodplain, new restroom and shelter. Most of the other amenities stay pretty similar, and then some of the new parcels of land will be used for community garden space. So we're really excited to see that happen. Cardigan Park, one of our newer parks on the very east side of town, Court Street, almost to Taft Avenue. The playground we were able to put in last summer through an in-house project with neighborhood open space funds. This next project puts the paths in along with a fire ring, shelter, and a little more landscaping that goes along with it. Have a nice circular path. Should be a really nice little neighborhood park. Iowa City Kickers. And this is a cooperative project with the Kickers Association. We have 2 ball fields out there that are not highly used, and this will convert them into additional soccer fields, which is needed by the current level of play. So it's $75,000 from the city and the other half from the Kickers Association.
I just have a quick question, and maybe this is Dennis or you, Julie. In those 3 that you just mentioned, those are things we already have budgeted, correct? I mean, they're showing up in the 2018 list.
Each one we've done some work on in 2017, and then they show up in the 2018 actual budget.
But we're not approving, at this point, we're not approving anything in the future in the upcoming CIP for these. It's already been approved.
I mean, yes, some of these are revised. I think that Kickers is a revised project that's come up since the last CIP, but some of the others were approved in last year's CIP, and maybe some of the design work's been done, or the project's already in motion as far as being completed.
I just wasn't seeing any money like in the 2019 CIP, so, okay.
Hey, Julie, before you move on, I'm excited about this project in particular just because I know that Chad's been really working hard as far as finding, people for our, a burgeoning immigrant population that's really interested in playing soccer. I know that I got an email about trying to be a coach if you have the time, that type of thing. So just to be clear, one, from a total standpoint, you're saying so $150,000 will be, and then Kickers is coming up the rest of that?
Correct.
The other question I have is kind of what is the, so the timetable is going to be open for 2019?
That's our hope, yes. We're ready to go on this project, so.
Okay. My just issue with it is that, obviously the more space is good, but this has nothing to do with the CIP and more from maybe a planning perspective to ensure that we have that back-end support. And so, I know that opening it up and saying, hey, everybody come and play is one thing, but I just felt like, that was a tough spot that, Chad was in with, a lot of those families wanting to participate when we didn't have the support from that standpoint. So even if the campaign, hey, this is a huge project, we know later on down the line that this is going to be a big deal, starting that campaign now, I think would be a good idea just to make sure you don't have to get in a bind in your office.
Sure.
Just want to clarify on this project real quick. The total cost is $75,000. The city's share is $45,000, and the Kickers share is $30,000.
Oh, okay.
My mistake. All right, a couple projects here with the cemetery, and we often forget this is one part of our operations, but a service to all of our community, and just a couple maintenance things at the cemetery. One is a cemetery shop roof replacement, and the next one is asphalt road repairs a few years down the line. Just basic things that need to be done to keep it safe and keep it open for public use. Okay, now we move to the 2019 projects. Willow Creek Kiwanis Park improvements. This is primarily will be on the Willow Creek side. This will be a replacement of the playground, the shelter, and the restrooms that are there. The playground intent is to make this more of a regional draw and inclusive playground, and that will still be developed what that concept will be, because it means not only accessibility for people with mobility issues, but also we have a number of requests from families that have children with developmental delays or on the autism spectrum. So doing things that we can to make sure that it's an all-inclusive playground will be one of the goals of the Willow Creek project. And then at Lower City Park, we're looking at replacing the playground there with a larger adventure playground. Now, it's still to be developed what the adventure part means, but think of it as being just a little bit larger than the newer playground at Mercer. So nice big equipment with places to play for little kids through probably middle school age kids. So higher, funner adventure type things that we can put in there. So a larger playground, more of a regional draw. Moving to the east side, we have the land, as you know, for the East Side Sports Complex out by the industrial area. What this does is start the process of getting it ready for future development by planting trees along the railroad. There's a railroad corridor along the south. This will get the trees in place and get them growing so that in the future, when we're able to build the fields, we have some pretty good buffer in place ready to go. I just talked about two very large playground projects. This one is a much smaller one. Fair Meadows Park sits right next to an elementary school, which has an amazing playground. So the playground at the elementary school is really sized for elementary age and older. What this looks at is at Fair Meadows near the splash pad, putting in a playground, a smaller one specifically sized for preschool children. We have a number of in-home daycares in the area that use that park. We'll size it for that along with a new shelter in that area. Weatherby is contemplated replacing the restroom and shelter and playground there. They are, we try to do it when they reach about 20 years of age. This one has been renovated at one point, so it's a little bit older than that, but the idea is to get it replaced with something that is more serviceable and more up to date. Scott Park, along with Rita's Ranch Dog Park, well used, but once again, one of our older playgrounds when you get right down to it and look at the equipment. So this would replace the equipment with similar sized equipment and replace the shelter there. There's no restroom contemplated for this park, just the playground and shelter. Napoleon, now the fencing around it is not why the playground needs to be replaced. We had issues this summer with drainage in the area, so often it was flooded and we couldn't let kids play because there was so much standing water underneath it. That's being addressed separately, but at the same time, it's time to get this equipment replaced. So this would replace it with a similar sized piece of play equipment. Recreation Center, we are just finishing a large project there right now, as you know, but there is much more work to be done. This project will look at the locker rooms, updating them for ADA compliance, as well as the racquetball court and game room area and some work in the gym. We did just resurface the gym floor and paint the walls. If you go in, though, the sound attenuation around the upside, the top of the walls still looks pretty shabby. This would replace that as well. So this continues the renovation of what work that we're doing now. Shattuck Green. Currently, this park primarily is just home to the community gardens. This will add some amenities to make the community gardens even more of a gathering place, so it contemplates a restroom shelter, probably some sort of restroom shelter with some unique facilities for the gardeners to use, whether that be additional counter space or wash areas. We're not really sure exactly what that would be, but that is what this project will do. Kiwanis Playground, and this is a replacement of the nature play area there, very popular. This is contemplated for 2022, which will have a summary sheet where I need to correct that on there, but this one will be, or sorry, 2021. By that point, it will be time that equipment is getting worn out and it's being difficult to repair and replace what we need to replace there. Hickory Hill, the north Conklin entrance, this would contemplate a new restroom and shelter in that area, and that would follow along with the Hickory Hill Park master plan. Glendale, smaller park, so this is just simply replacing the playground with a smaller playground and adding a shelter to that park. Mercer Park pool improvements, you'll see this one and also one for Robert A. Lee. We're quickly getting to the point where the behind-the-scenes filtration pump systems will need repair and replacement, large overhauls. So we have both of these included in future year CIPs. The HVAC dehumidification project at Mercer Scanlon. Currently, we are replacing the boiler and the HVAC system. That's out to bid at the moment. This takes that to the next step and helps dehumidify the building. That's something that we aren't able to do with this current project. We'll make it operate even more efficiently. If you've been in the building, you go in pretty much any time of the year and the lobby is super hot and humid. That's creating issues with everything from the tuck pointing in the structure to the metal surfaces and everything else. So this would give us some dehumidification to help correct that. This is what I was talking about, the Robert A. Lee pool system replacement. We have funding in here for a new West Side Park. This is one of the areas that was shown to be deficient in the park master plan. This doesn't contemplate a specific location, but as development continues in that West District, this would give us money to develop a park out there. Whispering Meadows on the southeast side, nice little park with a little trail. This project would add a small playground and shelter to that area. Lower City Park. We don't have in the current CIP the overall overhaul of Lower City Park with the City Park Master Plan. We do bite off parts of it, including this. So this would say that we would go in and be able to replace some of the aging shelters and restrooms, and we would do it in a way so that when we're able to move forward with the larger master plan, we wouldn't have to redo them. So we would do the ones closer to the hillside and away from the flooding areas. But if the full master plan doesn't go forward, we still need to do some repairs and replacement to the shelters. It's very much a well-used park throughout the entire summer, so we want to make sure we can continue to serve the public until such time as we move forward with a larger overhaul of the entire park. This is a redo of fields 4 through 8, just something we have to do from time to time, laser grade, go in and redo the drainage on the softball fields. Upper City Park, same thing. The shelters are becoming of an age where they'll need to be replaced. The restroom will need some work up there. This is a few years out, but once again, very much used throughout the entire season. We need to keep up on the maintenance and replacement so that it can continue to be used. Court Hill, smaller park. Once again, replacing the playground, adding some paths. The restroom was just done a few years ago, so this does not include the restroom, just shelter and playground. And then we go through several bike trail projects. Before we do that, though, I believe Ashley has the summary of how this fits with the park master plan that she'll give you. The only thing I will mention is at the top, Kiwanis Playground and Shelter. The one that's listed here is actually the PATH project. So you might say, why are we doing Kiwanis in 19? We aren't. It's just a few of the ADA paths that need to be done in 19. The actual replacement project stays over in the 2022. It follows very closely with the park master plan. We had to shift a few parks one year, one way or another, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, that it follows with all the work done in the master plan.
So as you look at that document, just to help you when you're seeing it for the first time, across the bottom you have the CIP year. So this would be the anticipated year of construction. And then the colors themselves, so that aligns vertically. The colors themselves are when it was scheduled to be completed in the master plan. So that's why you see a couple of those arrows off center, either to the left or to the right. That just means we're moving them up or back a year for a variety of reasons. Could be funding, could be alignment with a different project. But as Julie mentioned, I think we all feel really good about what the CIP reflects in terms of accomplishing what the community supported through the master plan.
I think that looks terrific, but I want to challenge something, but only to make sure I understand the rationale. Julie, you've referred to a 20-year lifespan for shelters, and maybe other structures, but definitely shelters. And, you know, I wonder about that. It seems to me that not all shelters decay at exactly the same rate, and not all need to be replaced after 20 years. So I'm wondering about that rationale. Could you help me understand a little bit?
Sure. Consider it kind of the benchmark we're starting with. So I'm very confident in the ones that we've listed for 18, 19, 20, that they're beyond that 20 years and need to be replaced. We use it as a benchmark past that to place them in the CIP, and as we get closer, we would continue to evaluate the condition. The 20-year mark, though, aligns pretty well with what was discovered during the Park Master Plan assessment and projects, so that's part of why we went with that. Playgrounds, it's even more clear on the playgrounds just because of the changing safety standards and accessibility standards. You could argue that you would go out into smaller towns and find a number of pieces of playground equipment that are well over 20 years, but I don't believe that they would meet current safety guidelines or accessibility guidelines. So part of it is keeping up with that. Shelters, yes, we've got, if we build them well, they may indeed last longer than 20 years, but that was a good benchmark for us to rate them and at least get them started on getting this process so that we get them in the queue and continue so we don't end up with several that are beyond repair.
Yeah, good, thanks.
One of the aspects of the master plan was that equity piece. There were some areas defined. I think there were 3. How is the plan? I'm not sure I see where the plan, the 5-year CIP plan, looks at those locations.
You mean by district when it looked at each
Yeah, it was kind of there was a section in the master plan which identified that there were certain areas. I would say one was just west of Mormon Trek. Another was in the Miller Orchard neighborhood, and then a third one on the east side of the river, I would say kind of in the Twain Bowery area.
So some of those are being addressed in different ways through some partnerships, either with the schools or with some other organizations to provide more park services in those areas. You're correct. The projects here really relied more on the assessment of current facilities and replacement of those facilities. And reaching the park equity question requires some acquisition of parkland, most likely in the future. And that's more going to have to be on a case-by-case as land becomes available.
So we think that in the future, there'll be some opportunities on the west side as we look to grow out west, and that's why that's identified in the CIP. It's a little trickier when you get into those infill areas, if you're talking about the Twain area or Miller Orchard, for example, because there's just not plots of land available. We've tried to be opportunistic. I think Chaddock Park is a good example. When that property came up, the council authorized staff to go out and negotiate that acquisition. And we'll keep our eyes open for properties that come up. As staff hears about them, I know I get emails on occasion, Julie gets emails, and we consider them. We have to consider not just the area that they're in, but the proximity to other facilities, the usability, how accessible those parks would be, what's the topography of the site, those types of things. But we do have those conversations, and I know Julie has those areas identified. But in the 5-year window, we see the real opportunity on the west side, which is why you see that unnamed or undefined project in there.
Good deal. What's next? Oh, are you done?
I'm done.
Oh.
Well,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I think the master plan really is helpful, just like with the bike master plan, in that you can then see the big picture, basically, which I think, from my standpoint, one of the missing elements, I'd love to see a master plan-like approach toward our street renovation, because I've felt for some time that it's kind of more of an open-ended situation. We don't know. We know there are streets out there in need of repair, and yet there's no document, to my knowledge, that identifies, oh, there's Van Buren,
But they have their rating of the pavement.
They have their rating, but we don't know when we're going to be getting to any particular project that's in need of renovation. It's not calendared. I mean, beyond the 5-year plan. So it's, we just don't know. I mean, and I know that streets are a concern.
Yeah, part of the challenge with streets is there's some more complexity in the variables that go along with it. We may not always be able to predict when a water main breaks, and we try to be opportunistic and redo a street and a water main maybe at the same time. Road conditions can deteriorate certainly more quickly than park projects, for example. The other thing, we don't always know when the state's going to come in 3, 4, 5 years in advance. And so, for example, as we learned that they were going to be doing Governor Street and portions of Burlington Street, we then turn our focus in that same area to try to build off what they're doing so that we don't come back in 2 years later and disrupt the same neighborhood with those projects. So we could probably forecast out for the council what we think would be, the road projects that we anticipate in the next 5 years. The risk you run is you're setting expectations in those neighborhoods that, hey, I know my street's going to get done in year 3, and then all of a sudden some other needs emerge, and you've got some unhappy residents that their project's delayed. A little trickier, but your point's taken, and again, we can do our best to give you those priorities, forecast those priorities if you'd like.
It might be helpful to have those priorities forecasted, but not explicitly as a part of the CIP.
Okay.
Okay, I thought I was done, but we still have the trails. We have a few trail projects to show. Highway 1 sidewalk trail in 1819.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to note about this one is it really completes that segment of trail. So this is the trail that was built a few years ago. This extends it from Sunset over to Mormon Trek and kind of completes that segment.
A portion of the Iowa River Trail, Benton Street to Highway 6 for 2021. Highway 6, Sycamore to Heinz in 2020. So all very much needed smaller trail segments.
And I believe this is the last one in the section, the pedestrian mall stage, which you'll be hearing about at your next work session.
With that, we'll switch gears a little bit and go to Public Works.
Thank you, Julie.
First one here is the radio backup tower. We currently lease space for the backup tower, so there's kind of that recurring cost for that lease. And this would look at an option for purchasing a tower in a location where the city would own it and no longer have that lease cost. Obviously, there would be a construction cost associated with it. At this point, what this would include is looking at a propagation study, so looking at what our options would be for possible tower locations. Does it make sense to do this or not? So see if there's an opportunity there. If there is, there would be the option to proceed with that. But at this point, it's really just kind of a propagation study to see what might be the best course of action.
Is there any chance with that, and I probably should know the location of Jex Towers, but I don't know if there's any opportunity to partner with what they have in town? Because I know they were partnering with the university, and I know that's changing. But I'm assuming you guys have already thought about that, but I just throw it out.
That's part of the process. Okay. We would look at what options would be there.
When JEC built their system, we made a decision for the non-public safety radios to stay on our own system.
Right.
What we will look at is the ability to co-locate an antenna on one of their towers.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Thank you.
The equipment parking lot, this really is just an overlay of the existing parking lot. It's obviously in poor shape, difficult for some vehicles to use, especially if you were to have like a loaded forklift or something that's closer to the ground, obviously creates some issues. So this is really just repair of the existing parking lot.
This is just a quick commentary here. Obviously, you're familiar with the streets building and getting off this campus down to the new Public Works campus. Expenditures like these are tough to swallow. You hate to invest money in a property like this that you're actively trying to get out of. But the reality is we don't see it likely in the next 5 to 10 years that the equipment building, we're going to have funding to move them down to the new campus where the land is reserved for them. Same with transit. So unfortunately, it's in such a condition that we really have to resurface this for the employees and for the equipment out there.
The equipment shop roof replacement, so this is really just making repairs. It's a situation where the existing roof is leaking, causing damage to equipment, materials within the building, so really just a maintenance project. The landfill equipment building replacement, so this will replace, I believe it's 2 buildings out at the landfill. Some of the issues here are they aren't sized correctly, so in some instances the equipment can't actually fit in the building, so it's having to sit outside even though there's an existing building there. So this would look to replace those buildings. The landfill tarp system, so this would be used for the daily cover out at the landfill. It also kind of coordinates with changes to some of the fill methods that are used, just kind of updating that system and taking advantage of some of the more current methods that are being recommended, improving efficiency, and so long-term would likely have some significant benefits to the landfill as far as compaction and efficiency in using the existing space that's there. The landfill leachate system, so this is, there's an existing system, and this would make some improvements to that just to, again, deal with the liquid that's out there in the landfill, the leachate, and as part of the requirements for the landfill, there's certain requirements dealing with leachate levels and that kind of stuff. So this is just improvements to that system to help as we move forward. Landfill cell design, so this will be the new landfill cell. It's pretty straightforward. You know, we do these from time to time, so this would be the most current landfill cell. Landfill bulldozer, so this really is just replacing an existing bulldozer that's reached the end of its life. So it would be purchasing a new one to replace an existing one. Public Works facility. You want to?
So this is the phase 1 of the public works site. So this would be the vehicle storage, shop space for the traffic engineering, water distribution folks, and the streets folks, and then also the wash facility as a part of that. We are currently working through the scope with Newman Munson. And I told you on Saturday I hoped it would be on the next council meeting. Unfortunately, it'll be the first meeting in February where we'll have that consultant agreement on there. And then this will also include some conversion of warm storage space for public safety use, fire and police will take over a building, and then the fire training tower will also be located on the site as a part of this first phase. The project, the funding that we have together for this is about $10.2 million. We had 12 million identified in a previous budget, so we're actually downsizing the funding on this with the hopes of still being able to build the same project that we had, and that came out of the master plan piece as we were working through that. So.
Ron, are we anticipating any solar infrastructure on this facility?
We will have a lead consultant working with us on the design of this project, so we will look at the ability to include those solar or geothermal as a part of the project.
The West River Bank stabilization, so this looks at the West River Bank just north of Highway 6. There's been significant erosion that's occurred, especially with some recent flood events. So what this would look to do is help to reestablish some of that area that has been eroded. Also would look to basically put some protection along the bank to eliminate future erosion, but then also with the plan being that long-term, again, with that future trail that would potentially go along here. Anything that is done now would be able to be reused and as part of that trail project. Lower Muscatine storm sewer improvements. So some of you may remember the Lower Muscatine Road project that was done a few years ago. Upsized the storm sewer system along Lower Muscatine Road. Unfortunately, it really didn't address much in the way of additional storm sewer in the neighborhood, and so the surrounding neighborhood has limited storm sewer. So what happens in a lot of cases is that storm water runs down the streets to Lower Muscatine, causing localized flooding, at least in the street. With the project, it had made improvements that kept the flooding in the street. So this would basically install new storm sewer along those side streets to help capture that, get it into the pipe quicker, and hopefully eliminate situations like this picture. The North Westminster storm sewer upgrades, a similar situation where we have an undersized storm sewer system. This is an area where we receive complaints occasionally, so it would look to make those improvements, upsize some of the existing storm sewer that's out there, and hopefully address those issues. Iowa City Gateway project. I'm hopeful this is the last time this will be in this presentation. So this is year 3, I believe, of funding for the Gateway project. Hopefully looking at completion of the project here in 2018, but this is, again, the final year of funding. Burlington and Madison intersection improvements. So a few years ago, there was a project that was out there to install medians along Burlington in the vicinity of Madison Street, with the goal of being improvements for pedestrian and bicycle facilities in the area. This project, we've kind of taken a step back to see if the medians are really the direction we want to go. I think the intent of the project would be the same. You'd be making improvements for pedestrians, bicycle facilities on Burlington Street, especially looking at the Burlington Street Bridge and crossing the river there. I know that's a hot topic for the bicycle community. So kind of looking at the same project area, same goals. The median may or may not be in there in the end, but again, similar project. Also, as part of this would be the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion of Madison Street. So pretty much the entire stretch of Madison Street would get that 4 to 3-lane conversion with the addition of bike lanes.
Jason, what are the concerns with the median?
I think some of the original concerns was pedestrians crossing Burlington Street. With some of the landscaping that the university has done and with the rec center now being complete, we really haven't seen that be an issue. So I think some of the concerns maybe that were pushing the project towards that direction really haven't been founded, as we've kind of seen now that we're sort of open for business in that area. So I think that's part of it. Also just kind of looking at, with the existing space, is there a better way to use it now that we're a few years down the road, kind of have our bike master plan. Is there a better way to do it?
I think it ultimately comes down to a question of the use of the road space. If the median's not needed to stop mid-block crossing because mid-block crossing's not happening, then can we use that for on-street bike facilities to get people from the west side of the river to the east side? We won't be able to continue those up Burlington, but at this time, because you'd have bike lanes on Madison, people could go east-west and go north-south and then move east-west on Court Street or Washington Street.
I can say I go to the Wellness Center pretty often. I don't really see much mid-street pedestrian crossing. I think people are using the designated crossings.
I would agree. American Legion Road. So this is complete reconstruction of American Legion Road from Scott Boulevard to Taft Avenue. This will include on-street bike lanes as well as a wide sidewalk located on the north side of the road. It will go from a rural cross-section, so the road with ditches, to an urban cross-section. So we construct curb and gutter, new storm sewer, that kind of stuff. It also includes a roundabout at the American Legion Road, Scott Boulevard intersection. So that is part of this project as well. Also, one thing I wanted to mention, there is also a pedestrian underpass included with the project out there by the new school that would allow people to walk underneath the roadway.
Jason, I have one comment on that project, and it's actually kind of a general comment. I just happened to be looking at last year's budget in the CIP, and it looked to me like American Legion was 7.8 million.
Yep.
And now it's 9 million. So I would say as a general rule, it would be nice, because it's hard to track these things from year to year, where projects have a jump or a drop. It could go either way. To highlight those so we have a better understanding of what's going on with the project, why has there been a change beyond just inflationary costs that explain the change.
Okay.
I'd say if there's a significant dollar amount change.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, right.
Beyond just
Not just percentage change.
as a cost of doing business change, but what appears to be a change in scope or something of that nature.
Kind of in relation to that, is that pedestrian underpass perhaps part of that big jump?
I don't think so. I think it was, as we've kind of been going through the functional design, we've gotten a better idea of what those costs would be. One part that's going to be tough to get a handle on at this stage is going to be property acquisition as well. The right-of-way width out there varies quite a bit as you go throughout the corridor, and so there'll be some right-of-way acquisition that will occur as well. Overall, I would say the scope hasn't really changed a whole lot, but I think it's just as we get further in the design, we get a better idea of what we think those costs will be.
And you're thinking the underpass versus like a bridge, a walkway bridge across?
Yeah, with the way the grades are out there, the underpass just works quite a bit better. So I think we had looked at what our options would be, and that's where things settled, again, just kind of based on the grading and how we would be able to do that versus what it would take to do the overpass.
So why not just an ordinary crossing that one typically finds inside the core of the city?
We could.
Crosswalk, school guards, that kind of thing.
Sure. I think there's an opportunity here for an underpass. I think with the topography out there, it lends itself to being a good location for an underpass. As far as if you were to do a crosswalk, obviously there would be additional costs with that as well. You'd probably likely have some sort of signal control or pedestrian signal, something along those lines. I think you would probably want with American Legion Road being an arterial and the amount of traffic that's on there. So I don't know that you're really saving a whole lot as far as costs would go, but it would be an option.
Okay, thanks.
This is 2020. I don't know where we are in the design process, but and maybe there are ways we could combine projects if there are any other that are of concern, but I wouldn't mind having a work session, getting a better understanding of what's involved with this project.
I would agree.
I guess as far as where we're at with the process, we are currently selecting a consultant to help with final design. So we're starting the final design process.
So I think I've heard at least 3 people would like to have a work session focused on roadway design for American Legion. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have, and we'll outline all this, there's some MPO money, some federal money involved in this project, and then you probably recall all the questions we got from the neighborhood too about this project when the new school opened up out there. So we'll try to give you a history of how we got to this point, and we'll just put that on the pending list and you guys can schedule in the future.
Good. Thanks.
Mormon Trek traffic and lighting improvements. So this is kind of 2 projects in one. Originally, this was the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion of Mormon Trek. It still is. Includes the right turn lane also at Benton Street. So there's that project. We've also added the lighting improvements. So this will be lighting, I guess taking a step back, the Mormon Trek 4-lane to 3-lane conversion really is from Melrose down to West Side Drive. So that was kind of the scope of that project. This will look to replace the existing street lighting that is located on Mormon Trek north of Melrose. And that's really come out of necessity. The poles out there are in really really poor condition. We actually had one fall not all that long ago. I don't know, luckily or unluckily, the electric lines were there to catch it, but so that, again, kind of out of necessity, we'll look to replace that street lighting.
I just have a question here.
Yeah.
Those two projects, the Mormon Track project and the bike lane, I see both of them at the same time. Are these combining project or separate?
So
for the bike lane and for this project?
Yeah, so the project would be a 4-lane to 3-lane conversion, and with that, we would add bicycle lanes on Mormon Track.
Sure.
Yep.
And you mentioned the right at Benton. Will that also include, which I think is a big necessity, is the left at Benton, the southbound on Mormon Track that wants to turn left on Benton? There's going to be a left
Yeah, so
left
as
lane
part
there now,
of
too.
basically the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion, that center turn lane would be left turn lane there at on Mormon Track at Benton.
Good.
And so I think we've talked previously about having that protected left turn there as well. So there would be an option for protected left turn phasing at that intersection as well.
There definitely needs a change as far as where the come and go is and their whole driveway and all of that. Yeah.
Is that a protected bike lane?
That will be a standard bike lane, so it won't be buffered bike lane. The Riverside Drive streetscape improvements, so really this is based on the streetscape master plan that was done back in 2015. We've been doing some work along these lines as projects have come up. So with the Myrtle and Riverside intersection or the Riverside Drive pedestrian tunnel, with those projects, we've been doing kind of those sections that are associated with those projects, but this would be the ability to do some of the larger streetscape improvements that were part of the master plan. McAllister Boulevard extension. So this is the extension of McAllister Boulevard from just where it currently terminates, just east of Gilbert Street over to the roundabout on Sycamore Street. So a roundabout was put in with the Sycamore Street improvements a couple years ago. This would tie into that roundabout.
Jason, on this one, I think maybe when we do the discussion about American Legion, we should also discuss McAllister. Partly because of the form-based code work at the intersection with Sycamore, but partly because of the discussion we had recently concerning the development on South Gilbert Street at McAllister. So there are questions there about the roadway design, mainly at the intersections, but I mean, we just need to work our way through that.
Jason, am I seeing protected bike lanes on both sides for this then? Would this be the first protected bike lanes we have on streets if completed?
I don't believe we have any current protected bike lanes.
Okay. Well, that's terrific.
But you're not not on McAllister. We're not calling for protected bike lanes.
Am I misreading that?
You have actually, I think we were thinking just maybe the side path.
I'd have to double check if we had regular bike lanes on the, I know we do have a side path plan for it.
Yeah.
Go back and look.
So the two icons that you're seeing on there would be a side path, would just be a wide trail, wide sidewalk, if you will, and then that's a standard bike lane.
Oh, okay.
The first buffered bike lanes will come this year with Dodge and Governor.
Okay.
That's, we're actually going to have a painted buffer
So
line.
these will be like bike trails, is that?
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, we're getting into the design now, so we still have some flexibility, but I think the thought was that the side paths, the wide sidewalks would be more accommodating.
Okay.
And the narrower streets.
That's great help.
One of my concerns with the bike lanes on arterials is, and I mentioned this a while back, the NACTOs, and I don't know if it's in a draft form or a final form, but if we're looking for bike lanes that truly will, you know, bicyclists from the age of 8 to 80 would feel comfortable riding on them. If you're running a bike lane on an arterial, they recommend buffering the bike lane. So that's sort of a new recommendation. I know we have some bike lanes on arterials now that I don't believe are buffered. So there's that, but also looking forward, will we be following that recommendation? Because I do think comfort, if we're really serious about the bike network And I think the South District is a great opportunity in that regard so that kids can ride their bikes to Alexander and to the park and what have you, that we follow that recommendation. It makes sense to me.
And I think this situation's a little different than what we've done on a lot of projects, in part because this is a new construction. So it's kind of a blank canvas a little bit, where we have a little more flexibility versus where you're trying to work within existing pavement or existing right-of-way.
Right. And my feeling is that this, where we are constrained, in my mind, it may mean revisiting the network, possibly.
Can I see the bike lane thing?
That sounds like a pretty big topic to me.
The Prentice Street Bridge replacement, so this is replacing the triple culvert section that we have down there on Prentice Street. The existing corrugated metal culverts are in really poor shape, so we have secured funding for replacement of this bridge. The Melrose Avenue improvements, this is a joint project with the county. So this will look to go from essentially Highway 218 to Hebel Avenue. And with that, part of it's in the city limits, part of it's in the county. And so what this will be is it's essentially divided into 3 sections, with the east section being city funded, the middle section being 50-50 between the county and the city, and then the far west section being funded by the county. And what this would do is basically, it would continue to stay a rural section, but there are wide shoulders planned that would allow for bicycle use as well.
It's interesting how these projects blur together over time. I thought I remembered that we had already approved construction of this particular project.
You probably approve funding because there's some MPO funding through there.
Dubuque Street reconstruction, so this is part of the streetscape master plan for the downtown area, and this would be that segment from Washington to Iowa. And it would be, I would anticipate, similar to what was done on Washington Street.
Main objective from the master plan on this one would be to provide more sidewalk space. Dubuque's very constrained on sidewalk space, so we'd narrow up the lanes and get some more rooms for pedestrians and cafes and things of that nature.
Kirkwood Avenue to Capitol Street connection, so this will look to extend Capitol Street to the south and Kirkwood Avenue to the west. This would be the Riverfront Crossings Park area. And with this would be kind of a placeholder project for extension of those streets, redevelopment of that area, and providing that connection between those 2 roadways. So this is the first of the 2 partner projects with the DOT. So this is the Governor Street overlay. You can see here by the map, it's a large area. Again, it would go from Dodge Street on the north down to Burlington Street on the south, and then from Governor Street on the east to Van Buren Street on the west. And again, this is a partner with the DOT where they would be funding essentially the overlay portion of the project, and then we would do kind of any utility improvements would be funded by the city. Then the other joint project would be the Riverside Drive asphalt overlay. Again, this goes Highway 1, Highway 6 area, and it would go from Rocky Shore down to Sturgis Corner. I don't think I mentioned it before, too. Also included with this would be ADA improvements. So we would be looking at the curb ramps and any improvements that would be needed for bringing those up to current ADA standards.
Jason, is that true? Does that apply only to Riverside or to Riverside and Governor?
That's typically what we do for all of our asphalt overlay projects now. The First Avenue Scott Boulevard intersection improvements, essentially this is installation of a roundabout at this location. We occasionally get complaints about queuing and delay at this intersection, especially at peak times. So hopefully look to mitigate some of those. The Gilbert Street intersection improvements. This is this project includes a few different things. This will be first would be upsizing water main along Gilbert Street from Washington Street to College Street. In addition, it will also include new street lighting, new signals. So new signals would be at the College Street and Washington Street intersections. It will include street lighting along that same block, as well as a block west and a block east on Washington Street. Part of the goal there is to just make it more consistent. If you look out there now, I think there's at least 3 different street light types, so it's just kind of cleaning that up, making it more consistent. Also will be new curb ramps and, again, ADA accessibility improvements at those intersections.
And this will be done in coordination with the, I don't know, 4-to-3 or road diet conversion of Gilbert, if in fact we authorize that?
It will actually be before that. We aren't actually touching the street pavement with this intersection or with this project, so it would really be the curb ramp, and kind of behind the curb line would be the pavement, although I guess there will be the pavement over the water main. But I think as far as impact to that project, that could be done fairly easily because it would be restriping. So the curb line will be going back where it is today. So any changes that would have to be done with the Gilbert Street project would just be a matter of restriping that block.
This is more in coordination with the Chauncey, and as that building starts to come online, making sure that we have the intersections cleaned up. Yeah.
Court Street reconstruction. So this will look to be a complete reconstruction of Court Street from Muscatine Avenue to First Avenue. So this would include new street, sidewalk, as well as utility improvements, water main, storm sewer, sanitary sewer that may be needed in this area. The Benton Street Rehabilitation Project, this will be an asphalt overlay of Benton Street from Mormon Trek to Benton Drive. As part of this, we would also look to install bike lanes on Benton Street. As some of you know, the current striping on Benton Street is not actually wide enough to be considered an official bike lane, so it's really a striped shoulder. This will widen it so that it would be a legitimate bike lane on Benton Street. Rochester Avenue sidewalk infill. So this will look to install a sidewalk connection on the north side of Rochester Avenue between 2410 Rochester Avenue and St. Thomas Court. This is an area where there's sidewalk on both ends, so it would just provide that connection, especially important with it being arterial and the proximity to Regina School nearby. Down at the wastewater treatment plant, the backup generator electrical system upgrade. This is really just improvements to the backup generator. It will also provide more permanent protection from flooding than obviously what is done now, as shown in the picture there. So it would be kind of both of those items. Wastewater clarifier repairs. Again, this is repairs to the existing infrastructure down there. The clarifiers have the original equipment that was installed back in 1989, and it's just showing its age, the wear and tear of working, and so this would be improvements to those clarifiers. The Scott Boulevard trunk sewer, so this is out there on the east side of town, just east of Scott Boulevard. The current trunk sewer is basically dead ends just north of the railroad tracks and east of Scott Boulevard. This would look to extend it along the low part there, the drainage area, up to approximately American Legion Road. One thing this will do is allow us to eliminate the pump station that is up there off American Legion Road, and that could be handled through gravity sewer, and we would no longer have that pump station and the maintenance that goes along with that. Melrose Court sanitary sewer replacement. So this is sewer that's located along Melrose Court. It's a deep sewer. We've had some issues here. We had one section where the pipe has been damaged and been crushed, and so we've done a temporary fix to get us by, but really it's in need of replacement. This project would essentially go along the same alignment, but would elevate the sewer to make it a little more shallow, so any future maintenance would be not quite as challenging. But essentially it's a replacement of the existing sewer. Here's another sanitary sewer replacement, again, along Nevada Avenue, more or less, again, replacing of existing sewer. The West Park lift station rehabilitation, so this is repairs to an existing lift station. Again, this is one that's reaching the end of its useful life, also has been susceptible to flooding in the past, so it would be making repairs and improvements to that location. Heat exchanger replacement, so again, down at the wastewater treatment plant, just replacement of an existing heat exchanger, again, just reaching the end of its useful life. The digester cover renovation, so this will be repairs and replacement to two of the digester covers that have shown damage, and so again, replacing of existing infrastructure. Digester complex rehabilitation, so this is going to be a big project out in 2022. As part of the waste treatment process, recently we've observed what's called a struvite issue, I guess you could call it. As part of the treatment process, this material struvite is developed. And again, it's just kind of a byproduct of the wastewater or the waste treatment system. What it does is it gets into the existing components, clogs them up, and really reduces the useful life of those components. And so this is a relatively new development. And so what this would do is this project would go through, basically tweak the waste treatment system to eliminate the development of struvite, and so it's kind of just tweaking the system and the necessary improvements to eliminate that problem in the system. The wastewater treatment influent channel modifications, this is a situation where the influent channel was sized basically for the full capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. With it operating not at full capacity, this is a situation where we're seeing sediment deposits and whatnot along the outside of that influent channel. So this is making a minor modification just to I guess, reflect what the actual level of the operations down at the treatment plant to eliminate those sediment deposits. Now we move on to a few water main replacement projects, the first one being along First Avenue. A few years ago, we had a water main breakout here in this section. It was fairly sizable one, had quite a bit of pavement replacement that had to be done. So this would just replace the water main in this location. Spruce Seat, again, water main replacement of existing water main, approximately 875 feet. The Melrose landfill water main extension, currently the landfill is not on city water. So they have a well out there for water production. This would look to extend city water and water main out to the landfill. This is planned to be done in conjunction with the Melrose Avenue improvements. So with them being in the same area, these projects would be done at the same time. The nutrient removal project, so this is looking at options for removal of nutrients from source water up at the water plant. So over time, we've been seeing more and more nutrients showing up in the source water for the water plant. And so this is a study and improvements to look at ways to deal with that. Dill Street water main replacement, again, existing or replacement of existing water main. The water plant and storage reservoir SCADA replacement. So this will look to make upgrades and improvements to the SCADA system for the water plant as well as the ground storage reservoirs that are located throughout the city. Again, just kind of updating it to a current system. Yes.
What's a SCADA system?
So basically what it is the computer system that kind of allows the different facilities to talk to one another. So it's kind of the system that it uses to communicate and provide information from those systems back to the operator.
You know, I think I asked the same question when I was doing a tour of the water plant a few months ago. Great memory, Jim.
SCADA stands for System Control and Data Acquisition. So it's the way that they control it and then also observe the operations and get the data back to the mainframe.
Bradford Drive, water main replacement, again, another water main replacement project. The water distribution pressure zone improvements. So what this is recently we've had some locations where development has occurred where we have concerns about water pressure and being able to provide adequate water pressure to those developments. We've seen it especially when you get at the far east or far west parts of town. And so what this would do is look at options for possibly implementing pressure zones within the city. Currently, the city only has one pressure zone. So this would look at improvements that could be done to look at creating different pressure zones and how that might help for water system pressures throughout the city. Sixth Avenue water main replacement, again, another water main replacement project of existing water main. Water plant softener improvements, so this is really automating some of the operations that occur out at the water plant, dealing with their softener operations. Jordan well rehabilitation, so this is improvements to the existing Jordan well and basically making repairs to that well location. DeForest Avenue water main replacement, another water main replacement project for existing water main. Collector well capacity improvements. So this will look at collector well 1 and the laterals associated with that and look at ways to improvements or repairs to increase the capacity of that well. Silurian well rehabilitation, so again, improvements or possible remove and reinstall of the 3 Silurian wells. Highway 1 water main replacement, so this is again another replacement project of existing water main. High service pump VFD replacement, so this will look to replace the variable frequency drives for the high service pumps. What this does is it allows them to basically vary the speed at which the pumps operate, which help with efficiency. That is it for Public Works. If there's no questions, we'll move on to Airport.
One of the things I'm struck by is how so many projects are good for the city as a whole, or good for residents of the city, but they're not visible, like at the water plant, the sewage plant, and so on. So that's one big category of projects. And then there are other projects that are highly visible to people throughout our neighborhoods and so on, like the water main replacements, like the parks stuff. And it just strikes me it might be helpful for our district representatives to know what projects that are highly visible to the public will be taking place in their districts. And then for us to have a big picture of that as well. And that'd be a slightly different way of presenting this material, but I think it'd be helpful from the point of view of the positions we're in.
Well, I think it builds on the value, which I really appreciate this year, of seeing the geographic distribution of the projects. I think that really will help us and the community in understanding what's being done and where it's being done. And I like your idea of the overlay of the district designations as well.
I think that's a good idea, and for the public to know that, because, my goodness, there's so many projects, and some of which probably by the public wouldn't be seen as glamorous or exciting like some of the parks or the bike plan, but certainly very important and very valuable for the community. Also, for the fact that, like with the streets disruption or sewer disruption, it disrupts people's commute plans, their driving plans, and they get upset by that. But if they can see the importance and the overall picture of it, I think that'd be valuable.
Is that it, Jason?
That's it. Moving on to the airport.
Well, before you do that, I want to make sure that all the department heads know how much we appreciate the work that's gone into developing this CIP, presenting this material to us in a new way. It's really beneficial, I'd say, from my point of view. It's the best presentation of this material I've seen in my, I don't know, 8+ years doing city council stuff. So I want to thank all of you for that. Hey, Mike.
Well, good afternoon. Mike Tharp, I'm the Airport Operations Specialist once again. With the airport projects, it's important to keep in mind that our funding is a little different. We get funding from two primary sources, and that's the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and then the State DOT's Office of Aviation. When we have a project that the FAA participates in, they're providing 90% of the project costs. And if the state's participating in it, it can be anywhere from 70 to 85% of the project cost, based on what the particular project is. So with that in mind, a lot of these projects you see are coming directly from the airport master plan that was completed about 1.5 years ago. And then a couple of these will also spring from the strategic plan and just continuing on those plans and the operation of the airport. So with that, the first one is the airport parking lot expansion. This is something that as the airport's been busier, more people have been using the conference room, more community groups use the conference room. We find our parking situation becomes pretty critical at times, and it's just a chance for us to expand the parking and at the airport so that the folks using the airport have places to park at. Airfield pavement rehabilitation, this is something, this area is actually the last of the 1950s era original concrete, when the airport was really paved by the federal government. This would pull the concrete out, replace it. We are seeing some deterioration of the concrete, but it's not critical at this point, so we've got it out in 2022, I believe, is the year. Hangar A door replacement, this is something that we've had on the books a couple of times, and we have gone after a state grant once, and it didn't quite make the cut. This project would retrofit the existing bifold doors in the Hangar A building. They run on a counterweight system, so right now it works. It's not exactly the safest method in the world, because once you pull the door down and it starts going down, gravity takes hold, and you know, if you let the chain go, it can slam pretty hard. So we're looking to retrofit those doors with some electric models, and then keep the hangars nice and usable. Runway 7 environmental assessment. This is something that'll have to be done for a couple of projects that come after this, but basically just takes a look at the environment and make sure the projects aren't going to do anything damaging. We're keeping ourselves in line with the federal priorities. And with that, the Runway 7 extension, this is a 213-foot extension, roughly, of Runway 7. Adds a little bit of pavement to the west end of the primary runway. And what it's really doing is, with our changes from the master plan, if you land on the runway 25 end, you only have right now roughly 4,200 feet of landing distance. When we do the threshold relocation, that'll bring it up to about 4,900 feet, and then this gets us to 5,100 feet. So it gets above that magic number of 5,000 that a lot of the charter operators that come into the airport are looking for. If you come in on the other side right now, 7, you've got 5,000 feet. So this kind of matches up both ends of the runway for those airplanes.
What's the level of concern with this project in particular? Obviously, you know, safety is a huge concern. So kind of what's the level? I mean, because I don't have my notes in front of me, so I'm really upset because I left it in my car. But I pulled this in my notes from the Runway 7 assessment, environmental assessment, which I think speaks to this particular project as well. But does this project need to be moved up because of the concern? That's why I'm asking. Is it high, medium, low? Like,
well, it's medium for us, but right now everything is. This would be a federally funded project, and right now it's being stacked up against the obstruction mitigation project, which is a pretty critical safety project, and that will take some time. To just complete the process and get everything taken care of for that one. So I think this one is on the books for about the next practical period after that. And in terms of safety of the actual runway, you know, it'll help because then you open up both ends, and what you're doing with this one is the landing distance on the runway that increases is the one that has the instrument approach attached to it. So it's those aircraft that are landing possibly in more inclement weather that get the longer distances. The airport frontage road and viewing area, this is something we're trying to get done basically for our 100-year anniversary, but this has been on the books for a while in terms of things the airport commission had liked to do. Just with their budget constraints wasn't possible, but this expands the airport viewing area. The shelter is currently in place right now, but adds some information kiosks, a little platform for folks to view over the fence and kind of see into the airport a little bit better, and then a couple of play areas and things to hopefully attract more people to the airport. You can come out, have a picnic, see what's going on. And then the frontage road, is there a picture for that one? No. Okay. The frontage road, again, is kind of cleaning up the trees and landscape along Riverside Drive at the airport entrance.
For that sculpture pad, were you looking at some type of, you know, monument of me shooting a basketball, or have we already made that decision yet?
We haven't made any determination, so that could certainly be kicked into the hat. Okay. You know, it was a concept of trying to put something out there that was just a nice artistic piece, and I don't know that we've put a whole lot of thought into it beyond that.
Okay. Surely a slam dunk.
A work session on that.
And this one is another project kind of attached to that runway 725 section where we're going to slide the threshold from where it's currently at, which is about a 800-foot displacement, and it slides back to being about 150-foot displacement. So we gain about 700 feet back of landing distance. And 1230, this is kind of a similar process where we add a little bit of pavement. What you're going to see on the north end is a displaced threshold. It brings the aircraft a little bit higher, especially if they're over that neighborhood to the northwest. So they stay a little bit higher longer. And then we add that pavement to the end so that we kind of maintain the same landing distances on that runway set.
Mike, could you go back to like that small park image that you had up just a second ago? Yeah, that one. So, sorry, I was out when you first started talking about it, but when I look at that and think about it, I think it would be wonderful if we could find a way to attract youth in our city who are from disadvantaged groups. Find ways to attract them out to the airport to learn that it's there, that it's something that could be of interest to them, help them understand what's going on there, make it appealing, and all that kind of thing, so that it could become yet another way in which we actually create an inclusive city.
Sure, absolutely. Any suggestions folks have to make that happen?
Well, the slam dunk, I don't know about that, but there are surely some good ideas out there.
No, absolutely. You know, aviation in terms of not only the effects on the economy, but just the job creation and the skill sets that it takes to be out there. I mean, anybody can pretty much take care of that. So, you know, income constraints really doesn't matter. It's just And there's a lot of good programs out there for high school kids to possibly apprentice in the aviation mechanic shop that's out there. So there's some avenues to try to tap into that. I'm certainly excited to see what we can do going forward.
Good.
Is there any attempt to, like, outside agencies or someone to offer scholarships? Because from what I've heard, it's kind of expensive to learn to fly or even have that sort of hobby for folks that might be interested.
There are aviation groups that do offer scholarships. They're not widely advertised. I think that's probably one of the problems with them. But there are some scholarships out there that do provide for that. I think that's pretty much it for the airport.
Good deal. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. John Greer, Fire Chief.
Good afternoon, John.
See by my one slide that this should be fairly quick.
I have a lot of questions, John, actually.
I'm sure you do. Apparatus replacement program. We typically run 9 years frontline, 7 years reserve. We had one engine fire pumper scheduled for replacement this year, but our fleet management scores did not indicate it needed replacement. We requested to move it to 19. That's why you're seeing two on for 19. And then the Quint is the other one coming up, the big dollar one. That's over at Station 2. It's a smaller ladder truck, basically what that is. And then the fire safety house is this safety house we've had for a number of years. We've been able to maintain it a little bit at a time, but it's getting to the point where we need to update and upgrade to what the current programming is out in the fire community. But we've been able to maintain it so far. So if you have questions about our apparatus, I'd be happy to entertain them. I'm going to sneak
Pretty
away.
straightforward.
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Wow.
I object.
There's time for everything.
We need one of those little bells where you can bang the bell and it goes, that was easy.
We have a couple of library projects I'll just cover real quickly. Pretty straightforward, carpet and furnishings replacement. Keep in mind the library is getting up there in age. Many view it as still new, but it's getting to the time where all those furnishings, carpet, HVAC needs to be addressed again, so this gets at the carpeting. Reconfiguration of the computer lab and children's room. I think Susan mentioned that on her presentation. And there's the HVAC as well. Sorry, I didn't know you were doing that. And come on up, Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Hello. The MPO remodel is just from when we merged about 3 years ago. We delayed the remodeling of that floor in order to accommodate the Iowa Green AmeriCorps. So this just finishes off that initial remodeling plan that we started when we merged. Any questions about that one? And then we have funds budgeted for the climate adaptation plan. That plan will be completed in May, and then we'll be looking through how we implement that plan. We have funding set aside to address what the plan will lay out.
Would this include stuff like, for example, the RFP on the solar infrastructure, or is that okay? Okay.
You've had this line in your CIP for a year or two now, and we've used it for some corridor tree plantings, the solar RFP, the AmeriCorps energy efficiency program, things of that nature. So we've been kind of suggesting things ourselves. We had the grant program that the council suggested. We just see this line transitioning into more of a plan implementation.
That's what I thought. Thanks.
We just have a couple of repairs at the senior center that are listed in here. So they do have a formalized plan, internal plan that they're using to identify specific infrastructure projects. A lot of aging pieces of the building, some water damage, tiles. So.
Okay.
Hi, Chief.
Good afternoon, Jody Matherly, Police Chief. We just have two items on the radar here. No pun intended for the police department. One of them is this year, and it'll be scheduled in the coming months, and simply floor carpet replacement and some cabinetry, just to update the interior of the police department. 10-year life on that. We're 24/7 operation, so it certainly gets its share of wear and tear. So pretty simple replacement on that. The next one is the in-car video system and body camera systems. The in-car videos have about a 7-year life. The body cam's a little less than that, 3 to 4 years. Those are due for replacement in FY20. And make that FY19, I'm sorry. $250,000, about $130,000 will go towards the in-cars, about $70,000 towards the body cameras. And then if we change brands, which we're likely to do given what we're seeing with the future with the system we have, there will be about a $50,000 back-end server that will need to be updated and replaced. So that's where we sit on that project. That's basically it.
You're done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Hi, Mark.
Good afternoon. Mark Rummel, Transportation Services. Our first one, the automated equipment. This will basically finish our install of new pay stations over here at the Chauncey Swan Garage. There's 3 pay-by-space machines over there right now that need replaced. They're at the end of their life, and we're coming close to some PCI credit card compliancy issues if we don't get those replaced by the end of the year. So. The next one, this is EMV. It's basically the chip in the credit cards that are out there now. So it's not required as of yet, but it's something that we want to get on the books just to be able to replace all of our readers in our parking equipment. Eventually, they're going to have to be able to read the chips, and right now they do not. So. This one, we're looking to replace or resurface the asphalt at the rec center. We think this is a great time to get this done this year before the Chauncey opens. The lot over there has a lot of cracks and just unevenness, so this will put an overlay on top of that. We did a similar project at the Market Street lot a couple of years ago. It turned out really nice over there. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but this will help both the rec center and, like I said, when the Chauncey opens up, it's kind of an overflow parking for that facility. We've talked about this a few times, just relocating the transit facility that is definitely in need of replacement. We've got a site with a Public Works master plan. We've got a location to place it. It's just a matter of funding at this point. So. Bus shelter project, we've got the RFPs currently are being evaluated for that project this year. We've got funds set aside to replace and add some this year. This will just extend that project out to 2019 to allow us to implement some additional bus shelters out on needed routes. As mentioned earlier with the equipment building, the transit, we don't want to put a lot of money into it, knowing we're going to move eventually, but we do have sinking issues. I think everyone's been out there, but you can see on this photo those pillars at one point were all the same height. They're sunk down in certain areas, and our problem here is with the approach getting into the storage and the equipment bays. If we don't overlay this concrete every couple of years. The buses get to the point where they almost bottom out trying to get in there. So this is just putting a little funding in for some asphalt repair to kind of fix the really bad spots. Mobile column lifts. So this is really just a jack, a lift to get the buses up to do repairs. We have some at Transit, but they were installed with the building over 30 years ago. There's maintenance costs associated with them every year. What's nice about this, it's a portable system, so we can use it at any of our lanes, and when the facility gets built, we'll be able to transfer that over to the new facility. So I think that's all I had. If anyone has any questions.
I think we're good. Thanks, Mark.
The last one you all are very familiar with. It's the Behavioral Access Center. The cost you see reflected in the budget there is just a rough estimate of what the total cost of the project would be. The local funds for Iowa City that are included in this budget are $2.8 million. That's a conservative number. I would hope that we're underneath. We come in below that number, but just because there's uncertainty in the location and the extent of the modifications to an existing building, if an existing building is chosen, are unknown, we padded the numbers a little bit. So 2.8 is what you're looking at here. That's would be a cash outlay, so that's not something that we would bond for. And I think our last slide is we typically forecast a few of the major projects that are maybe on the horizon. They're not included in this budget, but things that you all should start thinking about have implications on the future growth of the city. So Jason, are you going to step through these?
Yeah, so the Carson Sewer, this is a property west of Highway 218 with the potential for redevelopment in this area. One of the driving factors here is going to be that the sewer would have to be extended underneath Highway 218. So that's probably the major hurdle there. But it's out there for, again, possible development in the future.
And I'd just like to comment here, as we look out at the west side of Iowa City, there's not a whole lot of developable land left without opening up an area like this. The Country Club Estates last edition was approved this past year by the council. Camp Cardinal is certainly, you've seen a number of proposals for developments on Camp Cardinal. This is probably the next big area that we would need to open up if we want to continue to grow on the west side. Unfortunately, that sewer extension's, that's a tough project. We have to go all the way back to Kiwanis Park and upsize that sewer through existing neighborhoods to get under the highway there.
I understand the interest in looking at that and its value potentially in the future for Iowa City and for future residents. But surely we would need some pretty sophisticated thinking about how to plan it instead of just having residences out there because it's pretty far away from everything else. So that would take a considerable amount of forethought.
Peninsula Secondary Access Road, so again, here what we're talking about is getting that secondary access to the Peninsula neighborhood. There's been interest in the Forest View redevelopment area, so I think that likely that would be done as part of that development. So it likely would be a development project, but again, one of the main benefits there is providing that secondary access. Similar, the Foster Road extension, so this would be extending Foster Road to the east over to Prairie du Chien. This likely would be done in conjunction with development in the area north, or I guess it'd be north and south of Foster Road, but it would likely be done in partnership with the development of that area.
these last two projects, Foster Road and the Forest View Drive, there are not funds reflected in your budget to support this infrastructure growth, but we do feel like it's going to take place with the development over the next couple of years. In the case of Foster Road, the Economic Development Council previously began the process of setting up urban renewal out there for the purpose of assisting the Foster Road extension with tax increment financing funds. I think it's likely that a similar process could be followed for the Forest View project if it comes through and it needs to go through the rezoning. There's several steps it still needs to take, but that's probably a scenario that we're going to look at pretty hard.
Dodge Street reconstruction. So this looks at possible reconstruction of Dodge Street, essentially from Governor Street down to Burlington. At this stage, what we are looking at is functional design, so looking at what a cross-section might look like, what utility upgrades might need to be done for this corridor, and kind of what the project might look like if we were to do this. At this phase, it's just a functional design, so we're really just looking at kind of what that scope might be, and then we can start talking with the DOT to figure out what funding might be available and when this project might take place. Where this is coming from is Dodge Street was overlaid a few years ago. It's likely that the next improvement is going to have to be reconstruction. So just kind of looking at what that might be and what that might look like in the future, and then how we might proceed from there. The McAllister Boulevard extension, so this is the kind of the last leg of that extension, and this would go from Sycamore over to Highway 6. Again, currently in the CIP, it's the section from essentially Gilbert Street over to Sycamore, so this would be the next section to the east, likely at some point in the future. And then finally here, the 2nd Avenue Bridge replacement over Ralston Creek. We recently received notification that this has worked its way up the priority list for state bridge funds, so we would likely look at possibly pursuing those for replacement of this bridge.
And you may see this come to you as soon as the next council meeting in terms of accepting some state dollars for this bridge replacement. We were just notified, as Jason said, that this bridge now qualifies, and they have certain notification timelines. So we'll come to you pretty soon here and ask for your approval in us securing those bridge funds, and then we'll have a couple of years to work on the design.
That's it.
All right. I think you mean that's it.
That's all, folks.
All right, so you want a little feedback, or are you thinking?
Well, you know, at this point, we're sitting on January 9th, and you have until February 20th to set your public hearing to meet the state deadlines. And of course, as I mentioned on Saturday, we can't work all the way up to February 20th because we have to prepare the packet and notify the public of what the budget looks like. So you're really looking at, you know, that week of hopefully wrapping things up no later than that week of February 5th in terms of your budget discussions. We can take as much time as you want today to walk through the capital or operating, but you're looking at you know, roughly a 4-week period here for you to have all your budget deliberations.
Well, does anybody have any quick responses based on what we've heard and a little bit of discussion we've had so far?
Well, one of my comments would be is I think as a council, I mean, we're here to direct staff, but I think we also have to be really careful, and I think Jeff kind of walked us through this in one of the earlier times in terms of there is an awful lot of time and effort and thought. This is almost like a jigsaw puzzle that they put together in terms of funding and staff time and, you know, all the other resources besides money that go into doing these projects. So I think, you know, if we're going to suggest changes, I think we've got to be very thoughtful about, you know, how we potentially do that and understand that there may be a lot of impacts that we don't even realize in doing that. So it's just, I'm not saying we can't make suggestions or changes, but I think we have to respect the fact that we've got a very professional staff who understands the needs of the city, and I think understands our priorities pretty well after a couple of years with this council. And sometimes when you pull one of those pieces out, or try to stick another one in, the ramifications can be a lot broader than we realize. So I think we just have to keep that in mind as we're making suggestions or thinking about things.
Well, I would agree completely. It's important that we do that. And so at the same time, I'm trying to process what we've read and what we've seen from our really excellent staff. And part of what I observe is a very clear and valued effort to respond to our strategic plan. I mean, I see that very clearly with regard to the Parks Plan, with regard to the Bicycle Plan, with regard to the Climate Action Plan, with regard to the Behavioral Health Access Center, and some of the roadway renovation, a whole bunch of stuff, right? But I also think I see not so much with regard to social justice, at least something I could put in a category called social justice, except clearly the Behavioral Health Access Center. So I don't have any real suggestions about that, but I do wonder about it. And I'm sure you all have processed that. You've thought about it some. But that's kind of how I'm responding on the spur of the moment. So on the whole, I see a big plus. It's a really good capital improvements program, as is the budget itself. But I do wonder about that.
See, when I think about that, Jim, to me, there's so many things in here. Yeah, they don't jump out at you and say social justice, but I mean, when you have good storm sewers in, the one they were talking about, was it Jason down near Lower Muscatine area? I mean, you're talking about very moderately priced houses, okay? People having water in the streets. We're addressing that. That's not your $300,000 and $400,000 house neighborhood. To me, I really felt that this council talked a lot about social justice when we talked about the bicycle master plan and the park master plan. And we're putting millions of dollars into funding those. I think everybody wants their toilet to flush and have everything make its way to the wastewater treatment plant, regardless of income or race. And so we have to put those millions of dollars in there. Yeah, it doesn't scream social justice at you, but I mean, it's something that we need across the city. But to me, I actually feel very good in terms of the social justice aspect of this, particularly like on the two things I just mentioned, because we talked a lot about it in terms of the importance of the bicycle master plan and the ability for people, regardless of income, to get around this community better. If we improve the bikeability, we're probably improving walkability from some of these neighborhoods. And certainly, I think the Parks and Rec has done a great job in the Park Master Plan of looking at equity and spreading those improvements. So, yeah, I mean, social justice may not be written on the surface, but I think if we look at them with much thought, there's an awful lot of social justice that's comprised within this plan.
I agree, Susan. I mean, even the police department has a lot of their programs that would fall into that social justice, with the Shop with the Cop and the bike program, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It might not be labeled as social justice, and it might not have to do with like neighborhood centers or increasing that sort of racial disparity kinds of things, but it still relates to it.
And if you look at the CIP with the police department, one of the big issues, and this was, I don't remember how many years ago we got the body cameras, but I mean, this was an issue that the previous chief had some discretionary money, was trying to figure out what to do with it. And I was in a discussion with Tom Marcus, the city manager at the time, and the idea that was being proposed, neither of us were excited, and it was really at the height of a lot of the racial tensions across the country. Not that they still aren't there, but it was huge. I just looked at Tom Marcus and I said, why aren't we buying body cameras with this money? And we sat there and talked, and that's what we did. And I think that has served us well. I think the incident in the Benton Street Park last summer or the summer before, time flies now, with the young African-American football player was a prime example of the benefit of those body cameras. That is something that made national news. He handled it very well. He applauded the police for their professionalism, but given the way things have been going around the country, if he had decided to take a very, negative tone to that and just blast our officers, and it wasn't just ours, I think it was UIPD and sheriffs, we would have had no recourse if we didn't have body cameras. So, yeah, it's a piece of equipment, but it's a huge piece of equipment, I think, in social justice. It holds our police officers accountable, but it also supports them against false accusations. So I look at this CIP, and I think social justice is written all over it.
Both of you have made me think about a couple other features of the CIP that I didn't refer to earlier, and that's the bus shelters that would be installed, and the curb ramps, more of them. Those are both big for people who are directly affected. So, yeah.
I mean, I do feel weird about kind of equivocating on, what we believe may help people from different backgrounds. I mean, I feel like that's where we have that racial impact or socioeconomic toolkit that will allow us to kind of go through some of those questions and answer some of those questions for us as it pertains to that. And so, I got a ton to talk about. I don't know if we have the time. I mean, from a I'm prepared to talk about the operating budget and the CIP right now if we're going to discuss it. I would say from a CIP standpoint, I would agree with some of the comments that have been made. I mean, we look at it from a social justice standpoint, I see some things that are interesting. We look at a racial equity standpoint, I see some things that may or may not be missing. I mean, I think that the body cameras from the police department are an important aspect. I didn't ask some of my questions that I was going to ask just because I felt like, I wanted to ask them afterwards, but wanted kind of an update on how is it going and some of the other things. We had some conversations as it relates to the ACLU at the time that talked about their policy brief and where we're at as far as that's concerned and whether or not we're incorporating that. Maybe we weren't able to incorporate at the time because it was something that we moved forward on. I wouldn't say quickly, but something we moved forward on in some quick manner. But kind of where do we stand now?
Incorporate what?
That policy, those policy recommendations. I think we had a work session about it, then we talked about incorporating some of those policy recommendations as it pertained to the ACLU conversation. And kind of want to look back and see, there's some things you see, asking more questions as far as what are these body cameras going to do differently than the current body cameras that we have. And I plan on doing that after the meeting, but I will say one of the things that has been of interest to me, and I've talked to, I think, Rockney about this, not everybody, is the rec center. And I'm going to kind of talk about it from a 30,000-foot view. But, as we think about some of the renovations and things that are happening from a rec center standpoint, and Jeff somewhat alluded to this, somewhat analogously, as we're talking about kind of the Public Works new facility, and then we're still putting some money into our current Public Works facility. What about something different at that, at the rec center? We don't have a lot of property, and honestly, I'd like to have a conversation about what property we currently own in the city, because I think that even as we think about the recent parking lot kind of discussion in the church, there's some things that, popped in my mind as soon as we had that conversation, just as far as across the city, what do we own and what can we see in a different, new and innovative way? And so I think about the rec center as a potential, big time CIP project. Do I think we need to make a change right now? No. Is it something that we may need to think about in the future? Yes. That could be something that I think answers a lot of social justice, racial equity, at least issues for me. Again, from an empowerment standpoint, how are we empowering our communities of color? How are we empowering our groups of people with disabilities that need space, that want space, and aren't able to afford space in the downtown area or in some or across Iowa City? I don't think, again, we're ready to have that conversation right now or even within a month, because I think a lot of planning and discussion. I just said that without even talking to Julie, and I know that my meeting Monday morning with Jeff, I didn't even mention it at the time. So again, I think there's more planning that needs to go around that, but I think that's something that I think on the horizon we need to think about as we move forward.
Maybe I'll jump in here, and I just want to jump into what Kingsley was talking about for the Robert A. Lee Center. One thing that I think, though, is on the horizon that was briefly alluded to by Jeff for 2021 was this reimagining of the racquetball courts at Robert A. Lee. So to the extent that there was, I think there could be some opportunities that may be perishable in terms of what may go into there. And so that would be something, hopefully, I would like the council to explore possibly moving that up so that we could make that more permeable with the outside. We could reimagine different uses, and I think that also has the benefit, Kingsley, of I think staff has already had some thoughts going forward. I don't know if we want to get into all the details today on that, but it's always nice to be able to build on some initial impulses that staff has already have, and so my hope would be that maybe we could explore looking at accelerating that. I do want to back up a little bit and say, in general, this is a skinnier budget, literally, I think, than past budgets. How many pages were our previous budget? They seemed like they were about 1,000 pages.
Not quite 1,000.
Okay, they were more, though. Am I correct in saying that?
Okay. Lose count after a few hundred.
My perception, though, back to Susan's point of this incredibly important sifting process that staff goes through, and my sense is that was a very thoughtful process. I mean, it's always been thoughtful, but I want to emphasize that it does seem like it was really sifted through and that there were some key projects and priorities that were brought for us. So I think that's terrific. To the racial justice and equity issue that Kingsley had talked about, I don't know if we need to bring it up today, but I thought we were going to at least come up with a concept of a participatory budgeting pilot, and maybe that would hook into what Tracy had discussed with a little bit more flexibility in the PIN grants. So it may be that that's sort of already what you were thinking of, and I like your concept with the more flexibility in the PIN grant is are there any barriers, or are we blind to any ways in which PIN grants haven't been used as much? So maybe it's just sort of expanding on that sort of conversation that you're going to have with some of the residents in terms of making it easier to do. 3 final points, promise I'll make it quick. The retail consultant, Kingsley brought up the question of maybe the social justice piece of that. I think as we get that memo, hopefully we can get more clarity as to if there is a lower income focus to that, that would be part of it. And then 2 things I think that Mazahir brought up that were really interesting to me that I'd like the budget ramifications to at least be assessed is her discussion of the $15 an hour for city employees. I think that would be something good to at least get us the numbers on the budget impact of such a proposal. And the thing is the Sunday transportation. I did get a little bit of a sticker shock with the $600,000, your ballpark figure in terms of what that would take. But I'm hoping, though, that we can, coupled with the study, assess what are some transportation barriers on Sunday in which the city could be an effective catalyst and partner to address some of those barriers. And that may not involve, redoing the bus system or having a Sunday bus service, but there may be some other options that I'm not aware of. So I would just encourage staff, hopefully, to look at that, and we defer, at least from my point of view, to staff's judgment in terms of what may be available less than sort of the full Sunday bus service. But, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe that would be another option, too. And then final thing is the gardens. I always like seeing those expanded, and I think I was really thrilled with that. Oh, and one final thought. I'm not going to propose expanding the university program again this year, but I would like, at least as we think about our inner core neighborhoods, programs that are as good or other innovations that we can take to address that neighborhood stabilization. And the reason why I'm a broken record on that is that it has been so wonderful. It has been so successful. Easier said than done. I think that's what staff is in charge of, to think of that innovation. But I just want us to constantly think about, is there anything that we're missing in our inner core neighborhoods, or we could have something like the university program to encourage people of all ages and income types into our neighborhoods?
For me, I really would like to appreciate all the work, the hard work that our employees have done behind the scene. This is really, for me, it's too much information. I need to suck it first before I can understand it, before I can have questions about it. But I also appreciate what Suzanne said and everybody about social justice, because there is many things on those departments like referring to social justice. Just I would like to propose some of, the goals that I have. I already talked to Jeff about them, and I would like now to tell the council. Some of them already Rockney mentioned, but the thing that I haven't brought up yet is I would like to propose to our council member here that we need to increase the funding of the affordable housing from $650,000 to like $1 million. That's what I believe we need to do. I talked to Jeff a little bit about this, but I think we need to talk about it. So if the council agree, maybe the staff can help us, to find a way how we can increase this funding. And also, another thing is Iowa City. I think Iowa City should pursue inclusion zone citywide. I don't know how legal is that, but that's also something that we can talk about. And also,
sorry, before you go on, I didn't quite catch what you were meaning with that.
I said Iowa City should pursue inclusionary zone citywide.
Oh, inclusionary zoning. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That actually, to a degree, that's already included in the Affordable Housing Action Plan, but it has to do with annexations, right? Voluntary annexations.
Yeah, I just thought it's like in certain area. That's why I'm just thinking it will be like really great to have it citywide. And also, we talk about it, Jeff and I, also about like Iowa City should begin being landing banking with the goal of creating at least 30 units. Maybe that's like too much, but we need to talk about it. So I think if something we can capable, if it's capable, we can do it. Those, I guess, beside what Rockney said, Sunday transportations, study and creating Southern Loop route, and also the $15 an hour in 2 years for all city employees. Besides, the city could do business with a vendor who paying livable wage. And also, I know that our city attorney, maybe they passed a memo about that before I been in the council. We need to talk about that again. Even if we can not do it for certain staff, we can do it for certain things, like just bringing Coke, buying like staff Coke cookies. Can we buy it from like a vendor that really paying livable wage? Those kind of stuff. Just hopefully we can talk about it, and with the agreement of the council, of course, if we can pursue these kind of things. Thank you.
On that last point, I think we should bring it up during a work session discussion outside of this particular context and process it then, see what the other council people think and what staff has to say in return. All right.
I'll say a few words. I think, in looking back, and we're 2 years in, those of us who were elected 2 years ago, I do think we've made enormous strides as a community on a number of fronts. We have the Affordable Housing Action Plan. I think that was a critical move forward. No other community in Johnson County has undertaken such, I think, an ambitious program. We have the Park Master Plan. I think that's a really important equity issue. I personally would like to see some of those equity gaps that were identified in the master plan to be looked at more aggressively, because those are areas where there's just simply now nothing. We're talking about improving, and I think it's a good idea, improving the quality of our parks, the offerings they provide. I think back in March, I presented in a memo to you all the idea of promoting the idea of a complete park system, meaning that within easy walking distance or bicycling distance from all residents, that we would provide access to a park which would attract everyone within that shed, so that we had an opportunity to address what I think is a really critical issue facing all communities, and that is the kind of social isolation that we tend to experience. We need at various scales, the citywide scale, and at a much smaller scale, places where we can congregate with one another. I think that's a direction the Park Master Plan is going. You know, it talks about we gather here. That was kind of the foundation of that plan. I think the vision is there. I just want to make sure that where we've identified in the master plan did this, some areas where we just simply have nothing. And some of those are in the core areas, so it isn't land acquisition is problematic, that we look very carefully at those. The bike master plan, I do want to make sure that all members of the community buy into that, and I'm not sure. It's a question I have. I just listened to a podcast the other day which was titled Bike Lanes or White Lanes, and it's something I hadn't really considered. You know, is our bike master plan something that everyone in the community is buying into? Because I do think, personally, that the network will have enormous value to people of color and those who are challenged in terms of their household incomes, because it will increase their mobility. One area that I am still concerned with, that I feel we need to address more comprehensively, is what I would consider to be a Safe Streets Action Plan. I think in some ways the Bike Master Plan, because it was kind of unveiled as sort of one of our initial efforts with respect to our mobility options, it ended up framing everything that we're doing with respect to, or much of what we're doing with respect to increasing the bike network. I think that's valuable, but in my mind, one of the key advantages of our bike lane network expansion is it's improving the roadway systems by reallocating the roadway area. But the bike lane network and master plan does not address safety on those areas unaffected by the bike lane network. So I would like to suggest to council that we look at what I have been referring to as a Safe Streets Action Plan, similar to our bike and parks master plan, where we identify those areas of Iowa City where we do see issues with respect to traffic safety. You know, if you look at our reports from the police department, we had over 2,500 collisions in calendar year 2016. That's an average of 7 a day. We know that those numbers can come down. You know, there are ways in which we can improve the safety of our system. That, in my mind, has benefits with respect to the allocation of our police resources. You know, if we can reallocate that they're not simply enforcing speed laws or responding to collisions, if their staff time can be reduced by promoting safer streets, they can then work more effectively on community policing, which has an equity benefit to it. So that's something that you know, we can talk about in more detail at our work session, but that is one of the gaps that I feel is missing, and if we fill that, I think then our advancements with respect to destinations like parks will benefit even more significantly.
Okay, so it seems to me we have 3 sets of discussions underway right now. One has to do with the capital improvements program, another has to do with the operating budget, and a third has to do with the strategic plan. And inevitably, there's some degree of overlap, but we'll have to revisit each of these points in their appropriate moments. So keep track of the suggestions you've made. Try to keep in mind whether you're talking about the operating budget or the strategic plan or the CIP. But for the moment, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we've heard a really good presentation about a really good capital improvements plan. There may be a few things we'd want to tinker with here and there carefully, but in general, we like it. So I just want to acknowledge that, make sure you all know it. We appreciate the work you've put into it, and then we have our job to do over the next month.
we will send you a test link to this, and just ask that you play around with it a little bit. It's not live right now, and we won't make it live until the final decisions have been made, just so there's not misinformation out there. But let us know. We know there's some enhancements. We know we can supplement the information a little bit, but as you navigate it for the first time, if you have suggestions, please send those to us, and we'll take those into consideration before we publish it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I guess I'd like to mention also, I find these to be helpful.
Yes.
But I can say that during the overall presentation, at times I was getting confused about what's coming up in 2018, what's coming up in 2019, and so on. I just lost track of it. So that's not the case for these. They really help. Okay, any other?
One super quick technical question. The question of the amount of property tax reduction that we're going to be able to do from the debt levy. What is the number there? Is it 10 cents?
15.
15 cents, okay.
You want to clarify how that's working, Dennis?
Yeah, we're actually reducing the debt service levy 35 cents. And then the overall levy is decreasing 15 cents, and 20 cents is being increased in the employee benefits levy.
Okay.
So the debt service levy
So the
itself is
net
decreasing 35 cents.
is 15 cents.
Right.
Okay. The only technical question I have related to the debt levy, if we didn't reduce that, would we be able to retire debt at a greater rate or not? I mean, is that how that works?
Theoretically, you could, but there becomes a point where it's a diminishing return, just as far as where the interest rates are at. Then also at the same time, if you drive those debt service payments down low enough, at some point they're going to have to come back up.
Okay.
So, then you'd be in a situation where you've overlowered your rate and you have to increase it back up as those debt payments would come back up.
Okay.
So really, it's just finding that balance where you're bringing the rate down and retiring the debt at a pace where they're going to meet each other, where you want to have that constant level of debt service going forward into the future.
Okay.
So we do forecast another couple of years of decrease in that debt service levy.
Okay.
Okay, anything else?
So I just want to be clear, kind of for the next meeting. So what are the expectations for the next meeting?
Well, I'll tell you what, we can put a memo that summarizes all of the points that have been brought up both Saturday and today. We've been asked to provide some analysis on the $15 an hour and on the retail consultant. We'll try to get those as soon as we can, but for everything else, we'll just list out what we've heard, and then it's really, we'll help guide you as you want to consider moving something or adding funds to something. We'll have time to prepare and so that we can coach you on how we would do that or complications that would ensue by doing that. So you guys will just have to take your lists and go one by one, I guess.
Can we send those to you? I mean, is this like a send those to you ahead of time type of thing, and then you prepare that, or is this something that we put onto our list? I just want to make sure I'm clear from that standpoint.
I'd say the sooner you can send them to me, the better, and we will get them, whatever information we have, we'll get out in Thursday's info packet as part of your work session prep. The longer you hold on to issues, then it's harder for you all to react, and you probably have to have another meeting to react. So if we can identify them by, say, end of day Wednesday, if you can send those to me, we'll list them for your work session. And if you've already identified them, you don't need to contact me.
Okay, because there's a couple of issues I had mentioned to Jeff that I did not mention today.
Yeah, well,
so I just wanted to
incorporate those in.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with what Jeff just said. One, so they have as much time to get any information, but I think it's nice for us as counselors to hear about it before we walk into a meeting so that we have a chance to think about it a little bit instead of trying to react on the fly to somebody's suggestions.
That's a good point.
Agreed. All right, I think we're done now. So thank you, everybody, for all the good work you've done. Thanks to the council for being here and doing the work.